everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here today. My name is Shamima and I'm the Vice President of the Singapore Humanist Society. I'm on behalf of the organizing team from the Singapore Humanist Society, as well as our speakers, our panelists, and our venue partner, OnePeople.sg. I thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We hope today's events will help us provoke discussion that will ultimately allow us to build deeper connections with one another. That's the whole point of this afternoon. But the Humanist Society has organized and participated in a number of interbelief initiatives before today. The main reason we do this is because we believe that regardless of your religion, we all have the responsibility to enrich our lives through creating shared human experiences that focuses on our commonalities. But today, on the day that we celebrate World Humanist Day, we have our biggest group of panelists yet, and we are thankful that they are here to share their presence, their grace, and their eloquence. Again, a very big thank you to our panelists and our speakers. Can we please give them a big round of applause? Okay, so a bit of housekeeping before we start. Please help me switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you very much. Restrooms are available if you exit the hall that way on your left. This is also, we're trying to go paperless with this conference, so if you need a copy of today's program, you can download it from the QR code that's available at the registration table. Now, the program will also include a link that will lead you to the biographies of our speakers as well as our panelists. Now, so today we'll be hearing from two speakers, followed by the first panel, and then a short break, and then the second panel. Now, each panel is also going to have an audience Q&A. We've made sure that we've left ample time for that, so feel free to come up to the two microphones that you see on either side of the room to ask your questions. All right, so to kick the afternoon off, I'd like to invite our keynote speaker to begin today's proceedings. Now, Catherine Lim is a writer in Singapore and to date has published 20 books, including novels, anthologies of short stories. She's also a political commentator, giving lectures and various articles on political as well as social issues here in Singapore. And she was awarded the Southeast Asia Rights Award in 1999 and an honorary doctorate in literature by Murdoch University, Australia in 2000. Also a personal hero of mine. Have a big round of applause for Catherine Lim, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Yes. You can hear me clearly. Huh? Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here today to give the keynote speech for a very important event organized by the Singapore Humanist Society to mark World Humanist Day. You know, I suspect that the real reason the society invited me was that at some point in the past, I proudly proclaimed myself to be a confirmed and dedicated humanist. But the truth is that despite this boastful avowal, I remain as vague as ever about what humanism is all about what it stands for, its objectives, the values it hopes to promote, and above all, how it can deal with an increasingly a possible divisive force in our society, religion. Now, well, all these, this vagueness shouldn't really be part of a keynote speech, but never mind. You look to me a very kind and forgiving audience who will sit politely through my presentation, so here goes. Now, what I'll do in the next 15 minutes or so that I'm given is to describe my own personal experiences from the religious turbulence of my earlier years to my eventual embrace of humanism, which has since given me the peace of mind that I always sought. Now, I was born into the Taoist religion, the religion of my ancestors, with its worship of a whole pantheon of gods, Dua Pek, Gong Ti, Gong, Sky God, Lightning God. You would be familiar with these gods. Huh? These deities were very powerful and could also be very vindictive, hurling their thunderbolts at poor defenseless mortals. So, at age 15, I converted to the Catholic religion, hoping to escape all the ancestral superstition and nonsense. But I only discovered that I had merely exchanged one set of gods for another, had nearly replaced one fear with an equally crippling one. For my new God, the God of the Holy Bible, was as powerful and as vicious as ever. He could throw you into hell to burn for all eternity for a single mortal sin. And the Catholic Church, acting on his behalf, had dutifully rolled out a grim list of 7 deadly sins, any one of which could condemn you to hellfire. Let me see whether I remember all of that. Pride, greed, lust, envy, sloth, gluttony. That's 6, but never mind. I was aware to my dismay that in some form or other, to some extent or other, I was guilty of all 7 sins. So there I was, feeling as trapped and helpless as ever. Fortunately, in my later years as a young adult, I managed to find my third and last religion, humanism. Now, at that time, I didn't even know the word, much less what it stood for. I was only aware that I wanted to escape blind faith, to put myself on the road of reason, rational thinking, common sense. Hence, I wasn't aware of it, but I had grasped the essential, the underlying principle of humanism, and that is its human-centeredness, its orientation towards a purely naturalistic framework. For as we all know, humanism is uniquely defined by its utter rejection of all supernatural explanations in our quest for knowledge and truth. Now, in humanism says there is no need to assign a divine cause to the questions we always ask about life, birth, death, purpose, meaning. The answer is to be found in the natural laws and processes around us. In the naturalistic paradigm, there is no divine being, no devil, no angel, no hell, no heaven. There is only this world to focus on. And if there's another, well, it is inaccessible to us and therefore of no relevance. You know, wow, it was a real wow for me. I was bowled over by the robust, the healthy secularism of humanism. It offered me even more. It is linked with my other love, science. For the scientific approach is also a purely naturalistic one. Science tells us to use our natural powers to observe the world around us, to see patterns, regularities, recurrences in our observations, to make generalizations, test these generalizations, and come up with conclusions that could apply in our everyday life. That is basically what science is about. Now, science has served humanity or mankind so well precisely because of its focus on hard, concrete, verifiable data obtained from this world alone. The high respect we give to science is shown by the fact that scientific evidence, for example, evidence in the form of DNA, is readily acceptable in the highest courts of law. So it was another wow for me, the linking together of my two loves, humanism and science, and in a powerful partnership. And I'm convinced that this partnership can give rise to a philosophical system, a system of belief that will enable man to attain his full development, to reach his full potential. For science, with its emphasis on knowledge, takes care of the intellectual part, the intellectual aspect of the development, and humanism does the rest, the moral, social, psychological, emotive aspects, and by encouraging, by nurturing such qualities as respect, tolerance, empathy, caring, and compassion. So science and humanism complement each other marvelously to provide a model for the total holistic development of the individual. And that was why I became totally enamored of the pair, which I sometimes think of as humanistic science or scientific humanism. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We call it humanism, but we should not forget the strong scientific underpinnings. Now, as I've said, the value of science. I would like to mention something very important in my development. Science is very important to me because of its emphasis on objective reality. I'm going to latch on to this keyword, objective. Now, objective reality is the reality out there, of the actual world out there, the freestanding world, the measurable, the testable one, accessible to all for all time. Why is objective reality so important to me? Because for years I've been exposed to its opposite, subjective reality. Subjective reality exists only in the mind, in the imagination. And the knowledge it offers, because it comes from impressions, personal preferences, maybe even delusions, is arbitrary, false, and even dangerous. Now, I need only mention that for years I've been subjected to a great deal of false knowledge. Firstly, from Chinese folklore, which taught me, among other things, that all diseases are caused by evil spirits. And later, by the Catholic Church, that taught me, among other things, that we are all born sinners and can only be redeemed by the Church. Fortunately, in my later years, I came to find as my third religion, humanism, which has actually enabled me to cast off all this false knowledge. In the process, I've also managed to cast off a tyrannizing force in my young life, religion. Religion had imposed upon me the need for faith, emphasizing the dominance of faith over common sense and reason, especially if these clashed with the teachings of the Bible and the Church. Now, these were two sources of authority which you could never go against because the punishment could be severe. Now, I'm really very glad that I'm well past this, but I am also aware, fortunately, that today, with the advent of science, with the advent of technology, the spirit of free inquiry, the respect for the individual, religion has lost its own influence. In fact, I would say that it has not only lost its authority, its role is so diminished that it can be said to be in a position of retreat. One of the strategies that religion uses to halt, or at least to slow down this retreat, is to tone down, to relax its dogmatic stance. For instance, the Catholic Church has more or less relinquished a cherished dogma, and that is the dogma of Papal infallibility, the teaching that the Pope, because he's guided by the Holy Spirit, is totally, completely incapable of error. Now, obviously, such absolutism is no longer acceptable to the modern way of thinking. Another strategy of coping is the assurance that one need not interpret the Bible literally. That is, one need not take as literal actual events the stories in the Bible. For example, the creation story of Adam and Eve, the acts of divine intervention, such as the miraculous parting of the Red Sea, the incarnation of God as a human being in the womb of a virgin. Therefore, how should we interpret the Bible? Well, metaphorically, symbolically. For example, the 6 days of creation can be interpreted as a period of geologic time, lasting thousands, maybe even millions of years, to enable the planet to evolve to its present state. Heaven and hell are not actual places of suffering, of pleasure and suffering, but states of mind. And the resurrection of Jesus may have been an event of exceptional spiritual intensity and significance, rather than an actual act of coming back to life after 3 days in the tomb. So this is the kind of interpretation that is welcome to me. In general, I would say that religion is moving away from the divine-centered elements requiring faith to the more naturalistic, human-centered concerns requiring reason, supported by the hard evidence provided by the discoveries of science, archaeology, anthropology, discovery of old texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, I see this as a wonderful, a very welcome development in the effort of religion to fit in with the times. Maybe religion has no choice. It has no choice but to make this change. Otherwise, it will be always lagging behind people's needs and aspirations in a rapidly changing world. Therefore, it has to adapt, to fit in with the modern modes of thinking, the new spirit. Now, but before it can do this, it seems to me religion has three major challenges which it has to face. Firstly, it must be prepared to give up its own attachment to its conservatism. Religion is by nature conservative and tradition-bound. And to do an overhaul would require a massive effort. It would mean, for example, the dilution or even the abandonment of those very doctrines that had defined and distinguished it in the first place. Secondly, religion must be prepared to face up to its not exactly honorable past. Now, unlike the illustrious history of humanism, which began as a Renaissance and Enlightenment event that freed people from the thinking of the Dark Ages, the history of Christianity is a little bit mixed. In fact, it has even come to be associated with intolerance, exploitation, even violence and bloodshed. One need think only of the Spanish conquistadors who plundered the gold of the Incas and then forced them to convert to the Catholic religion. Or the violence committed during the Crusades, the so-called Holy Wars, violence committed on both sides when streets supposedly ran with blood. And thirdly, I think religion must be prepared to give up its stubborn claim of exclusiveness. This applies to the three Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, each of these three religions claims that it is the one true religion, the one divinely ordained, the favored one, the chosen one. Apart from the logical impossibility of all three religions being right, there is the distinct possibility of all three being wrong, because they not only contradict each other, but themselves, each religion invariably splitting up into sub-religions that continue to disagree among themselves, so there is continuous splitting down the line, until in the end, you have a plethora of breakaway new religions. Hence, if religion is to do an overhaul, it has to face massive challenges, maybe even insurmountable challenges. Now, a crucial question is this. Ultimately, is religion incompatible with the secularism of humanism? Are humanists necessarily atheists? I don't know. Now, I think there are many atheists who are very comfortable with the faith that they profess, whether publicly or privately. Now, I suspect that the greatest appeal of religion for humanists is the emotive bonding of religious rituals and ceremonies. For after all, humanism is a largely intellectual enterprise, whereas all of us, all humans, crave the warmth of bonding, connection, intimacy. Now, by and large, we can say that humanism enjoys a very good reputation. It is positively entrenched in the human, in the mainstream consciousness, to such an extent that it's actually very hard to say anything bad about humanism. You try this little test on yourself. You try to attach a negative adjective to humanism, and then you see how strange you sound, maybe even how ridiculous. Try this. Try saying an immoral humanist, a cruel humanist, unthinking, heedless, stupid humanist. You see, all these sound like true oxymorons. Right? They are absolutely stupid. Now, I think the reason is this. There is no belief system, no philosophical system that is so broad in scope, so far in reach, so generous in spirit, so sincere in purpose as humanism. It has something for everybody. Nobody goes away empty-handed. And now, at this stage in my ruminations, I would like to share some thoughts about the what-ifs of history, using humanism to focus my thinking. What if Hitler had been exposed to the principles of humanism in his youth? 6 million Jews would not have been killed. What if Stalin had been similarly influenced, even if only mildly? Millions would not have died of starvation in the Ukraine. What if the colonialists who dispossessed and oppressed the natives of the Americas, Africa, Asia, what if those who had engaged in the slave trade, what if those who still engaged in child trafficking, what if? Now, at the same time that we roundly condemn those who wronged mankind because they lacked humanism, we should applaud those who made our world a better place because they were inspired by it. So I would say 3 cheers for the philosopher Confucius. Also 3 cheers for the humanitarian Mahatma Gandhi, for the scientist Albert Einstein. 3 cheers also for democracy, for meritocracy, for philanthropy. Maybe it's only 2 cheers for capitalism, for scientific technology, for feminism. What about humanism? Does it deserve the full quota of 3? No. It should not be just 3 cheers, but 3 plus 3, and maybe plus another 3 for this wonderful liberating life philosophy, which I would urge all of us without exception, to embrace. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Okay, our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the founding president of the Humanist Society in Singapore. I'd like to invite Paul to make his way up. Allow me to introduce him. Now, Paul is the founding president, as mentioned. He holds a degree from the National University of Singapore and MBA from Henry Management College. He is the author of The Rejection of Pascal's Wager in 2009, published then, and contributed a chapter to the book The Christian Delusion, published by Prometheus in 2010. Paul is married and has 4 children.
Hi everybody. Let me just see if I can get it right. Okay, I'm just here to give a brief introduction. Some of you may not are not humanists, and so I'm just going to give some sort of a short explanation of the terms and kind of things that we use. What Catherine said about her having the vaguest idea of what humanism is, that's actually not uncommon because we don't really have a set of dogmas. There's a lot of an agreed upon basis by which we negotiate, argue, debate, and all that. So I'm just going to give you a few definitions of some words, but be aware that even among circles of people who use those words, there are disagreements as to what those words actually mean. Okay, the first word is atheist. I am an atheist. And one of the problems with that word is if you look at the dictionary, most dictionaries or many dictionaries get the definition wrong. One example is Webster's. Webster's defined atheism as a disbelief in the existence of a deity or the doctrine that there is no deity, and defines an atheist as one who denies the existence of God. Now, this is not so much incorrect as too restrictive. If you were to ask practicing atheists, like me, people who call themselves atheists, what actually it means, and I'll show you the root meaning of the word comes from the differences between theism and atheism. When you put an A in front of the word, like gnosis means knowledge, gnostic, and agnostic means without knowledge. It doesn't mean against knowledge, anti-knowledge, it just means without. So when you say theism in its very generic meaning as the belief in God or gods, then atheism simply means without belief. So someone without belief can say, I believe there is no such thing as a God, or I'm anti-God, or someone will say, I just don't have enough evidence, and I'm not going to have a belief on something I don't have enough evidence. So all those ranges of thought fall within the definition of atheism. In fact, this is not a new definition. If you look all the way back to the 19th century, this is how Charles Bradlaugh, one of the early founders of the Rationalists and secular movement in the UK, would define it. Atheism is without God. It doesn't assert no God. It does not say there is no God. It just says that I know what you mean by the term. So it needs more definition. And more recently, George H. Smith in his book, very well written book. So if you want to get an idea whether you agree with it or not, what atheism actually entails, this is a very good book. And essentially saying the same thing as Charles Bradlaugh did about 100 years ago, which is that in its broadest form, atheism is someone who is without belief. So it's not anti-theist, it's not, those are all within it, but so one of the dictionaries or one of the places that got it right is Wikipedia. Wikipedia actually have one of the best short definition of what atheism is, which is, in its broadest sense, is simply the absence of belief in the existence of deities. Okay, the next word that causes a lot of confusion is agnosticism. Now remember, when I say if an atheist is someone without belief in theism, there is no middle ground. There is no I'm an atheist, I'm a theist, I'm an agnostic in the middle. So if you look at the originator of the word agnosticism, which is Thomas Henry Huxley, he defined it not so much as a doctrine or a belief or a lack of belief, but more of a method of determining whether something is true or not. And if you don't know, you say you do not know. He defined it in many different places and many different writings, but one of the best definitions is essentially is the essence of science. That means simply means if you do not have enough evidence to say something is true or not, don't say anything about it. Just say you don't know. And that's in that essence what agnosticism is. Now, mind you, of course, I have discussions with people who call themselves agnostic, who say, no, it's the middle ground and all that. So, but this is how, if you define atheism, as most atheists do, as someone without belief, then agnosticism has its place, the way Thomas Henry Huxley would define it. You can see some modern definitions in some dictionaries calling agnosticism as a doctrine, that something is essentially unknowable. Now that didn't come from Huxley, but in that case, then an agnostic can be a theistic agnostic, like you can call Soren Kierkegaard an agnostic. He believes in God, but he doesn't know how, he admits doesn't have evidence, and you can call him an atheist who say doesn't know an agnostic as well. So in that sense, it's not very helpful in telling where that person stands vis-a-vis theism. Oops, what did I just do? Sorry about that, I just made this cease to exist. Okay, another word that people get confused a lot, we ask people what I am, I'm a free thinker, is the word free thinker. Actually, there are two different words, or two different sets of words. One is two separate words, free thought. Now, free thought is simply the idea that it's a way of thinking that does not incorporate dogma or dogmatic thinking, be it religious or something else. In fact, if you look at one of the earliest books on free thinking, published in 1718, that gentleman was arguing for free thinking as a way to prove his religion, Christianity, as true. So in that sense, free thinking is broader, whereas the word free thought as one word is actually a movement originated in 18th century England, I think, where apart from incorporating the concept of free thinking, they include the value of reason and the elimination of superstition and ethics and all that. So there are two different meanings. So when someone says they are a free thinker, you can actually ask them to elaborate. Is free thinker as one word or free thinker as two separate words? Another word that causes a bit of confusion is rationalism. Actually, it started in German theology, actually in the 18th century, where they started to incorporate scientific way of thinking into studying the New Testament and all that. And the idea of rationalism is that we do not need just revelation to find the truth. We can actually use reason and evidence and all that. And that's actually not new in Christian tradition as well. I mean, people like Thomas Aquinas early on have used reason to deduce what he felt was proof for the existence of God and all that. So it's not unusual for that to happen. The second definition of rationalism is what many non-believers use, and still today many societies call themselves rationalist society. These are people who are non-believers, who are atheists, and in a sense, the rationalists of the 19th century were the forerunners of what you would call humanism today. And thirdly, to add to the confusion, there is a philosophical school called rationalism, which, as opposed to empiricism, says that you can actually deduce truth about the world just by thinking itself. People like Descartes and Kant and all that, and Immanuel Kant. So they are rationalists as opposed to the empiricists who says you need evidence from the outside world before you can know what is true or not. So those are three different meaning of the word. And this is, I just want to show this because what you see so far are 19th century white men, so I thought I'd show a 19th century white woman to show that the movement is not just about from men itself, and also to show you that Hypatia Bonner, one of the characteristics of the rationalists and the free thought movement of the 19th century wasn't that they were pontificating that there is no religion and all that. They were actually activists. Many of them, Bonner herself was the chairperson of the Rationalist Peace Society. They tried in the early 20th century unsuccessfully to stop World War I. They failed, obviously, but they tried. And there were earlier people like Annie Besant who fought for poor women in the UK to have access to the rights of the knowledge of birth control, which in those days was not easily available. She was jailed under the UK blasphemy laws because the description had to be clear enough for women to know how to use it. It can't just be in vague terms, and for that, she was jailed for that. So there were women who fight for what they call suffrage, universal suffrage, the right to vote. Many of them were non-believers. And since we have a mixed group here, I just want to say that I'm not saying that only non-believers fight for. I mean, one of the things where believers and non-believers came in the 19th century together was slavery. There were a lot of rationalists and free thinkers who fought alongside religious believers to end slavery. Obviously, in the South, in the US, they used the Bible to defend slavery, but there were other pastors and all that who were in the North and in the UK who were strongly allied with the non-believers to fight what they saw as an evil institution. Maybe a model for us to work together when things we agree on to fight for the greater good. Okay, last word I want to maybe talk about is secularism before I go into humanism. This is a term that was first defined by a guy called George Halioke. I'm not sure I pronounced his name correctly. And this is how he actually wrote it. Very typical 19th century writing. Is very obtuse, but essentially he says, you can improve life by material means. You use science and do what is good because it is a good thing to do. You don't think about rewards and punishment and all that. So that's actually the essence of modern humanism, when you think about it. And again, when I talk about confusion of definitions, one of the, not like Halioke himself do not think atheism is a necessary component of secularism, while other adopters of the term, like Charles Bradlaugh that we met just now, insisted that it is. And of course, in the world of politics, secularism essentially means the separation of church, mosque, temple, and state. Now, obviously, we know many religious people who are secularists. For instance, the ex-Indonesian president Gus Dur, who himself was a cleric, a religious cleric, was a very strong proponent of separation of mosque and state in Indonesia. So, in summary, membership of secular societies, when you see them, can have a very vast difference in the people in the, like US, for instance, they consist of a group of Baptist pastors, atheists, and all that, essentially to keep the church and state separate. And then in the UK, the National Secular Society is essentially atheistic, fighting for the same thing, but for some reason, there are not many religious people in that group. So to summarize, one thing to remember is not all secularists are atheists, but all atheists are secularists. Okay, who are the humanists? We have many of us are humanists here. I'm just showing some examples of the more well-known ones. In Singapore, we obviously have Catherine, Alex Au, identify themselves as humanists. In places, you have Stephen Weinberg, a Nobel Prize winner, Richard Dawkins, I think we all know him, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Salman Rushdie, they all have identified themselves as humanists. So what are humanists? Well, remember what Catherine said as well. The reason why you're vague is there is no body of dogma, because humanism essentially embraces just a few basic ideas. One is that we embrace a morality centered on human welfare and human flourishing that does not appeal to any supernatural force. Now that's crucial, because in the end, how we judge if something is good or bad in the long run is, does it make human beings better? Does it make us happier? And that's really a very good yardstick to use in, I think, probably 99.9% of all moral dilemmas that we all have to go through. We assert that human beings come up with meanings in their own life. Now, that does not mean that life, in essence, have meaning. You can lead a meaningless life. You can drink, sleep, eat, die. That's it. Your life is meaningless. We're not saying that we believe life has meaning, but the meaning of life has to come from within. It's not an externally imposed meaning of life. That's quite different. And we take a rational approach. Now, that doesn't mean we are always rational. We're human beings. We get angry. We, sometimes make decisions that we regret, but we try to take a rational approach to problems, whether it's scientific, political, or social. And we don't just obsess with ourselves with just the rational part. We realize that part of human existence is, in a way, some people may use the word spiritual, music, arts, love, human interactions. So, and someone who calls himself humanist may be an atheist, or they call themselves agnostic, rationalist, free thinker. And I want to talk a bit about the roots of humanism, because I'm half Irish, so I've been accused, well, my name is Paul Tobin, this is an Angmo Western thinking, and it's somehow something we import into an Asian culture. I do want to show, first, yes, the modern humanism did start from the West, and it starts in the 1930s. And that's humanists with a capital H, by the way. They are also religious humanists who share many of the values that humanists share, but they add to the fact that they are religious. So humanists with a capital H, in sense of being secular and not having a religious or supernatural background, can be said to start around the 1930s, when the first Humanist Manifesto was published at the University of Chicago. And John Dewey is one of the signatories of that. Just one name that you may be familiar with, the Dewey Decimal System. But the origins of the word humanist goes back at least 1,000 years, when it's used by Cicero to mean humanitarianism, means compassion towards your fellow man, and humanities meaning the study of subjects related to people. So your combination of compassion and knowledge is essentially what modern humanism is. Okay, I was telling you about how deep the root goes. Now, the word humanism in this context is quite new, but the philosophical underpinning of humanism goes back quite far away. You find them in thinkers like, in European thinkers, in Chinese, even in Middle Eastern and Indian as well. I just want to show you a few examples. This is taken from a Tamil couplet called the Tirukural. Essentially talks about skepticism about revealed knowledge, that you want to find out about facts, you have to study the natural phenomenon. He also talks about taking care of other people, that you should help other people without trying to show off and all that. So that's, again, is the essence of what modern humanism is. And Mencius talks about the fact that when we feel compassion for people, when we see a small kid falling in the well, we don't think, how will people think of me if I walk away? You immediately feel compassion. There's no reasoning process. You immediately, that's human. That's the essence of what it is to be human. We don't think about rewards and punishment when we do good. Next example is Epicurus. And again, unfortunately, his name has been associated with love for food and gluttony and all that, but he actually was a very good, a very well-known thinker, in that if you look at what he's writing, that very humanistic in that sense. He talks about life being finite, but the finiteness of life does not make it any less valuable, He talks about pleasure, which is not just food and drink, his unfortunate association of his name with it. Pleasure involves knowledge as well. And he also talks about the importance of finding out about nature using science. And lastly, we have from the Middle East as well, Omar Khayyam, the Persian poet. We used to have a Persian guy in our Humanist Society. He's moved to Australia, but one of the good things he said, they actually learned Omar Khayyam in the original Persian, and he was the one who pointed this out to me, that Omar Khayyam was actually quite a rationalistic, humanistic thinker. He was skeptical of the prevailing beliefs around his time, and he was also one for compassion. Don't give grief to anyone and all that. And one to talk about enjoyment of life, drink wine and all that. So the roots of humanism, what we stand for, actually spans the centuries and spans various kind of cultures. It doesn't just come from the West. And the main difference between humanism today and how it's developed is there's a tendency for humanists to now come together because we need to be able to organize to help each other and help others as well. You can't just do it by yourself and pontificate from your own room and writing something else. So the major humanist organization is the IHEU. It's an umbrella organization. It has about, I think, more than 50 countries. There are two things. The last two things that are quite important for us as non-believers, and I think some of you may not be familiar being from the religious background, is that oftentimes when you're a non-believer and you go to a certain place where religious tradition plays a strong role, your very existence is considered a bad thing. I mean, countries like Pakistan, for instance, Saudi Arabia, if you come out as a non-believer, you can get killed. You can get legally sentenced to death for that. So one of the things that IHEU do is they publish the Freedom of Thought report. So every year, they evaluate all the countries and they figure out what kind of freedom you have to be a believer, to be a non-believer, and all that. And the good thing about that is that report is now taken up by a lot of the major press, newspaper, major news organizations all over the world. So you do get publicity for places where don't recognize that people have a right of conscience not to believe, to step out from the belief system. And he has UN observer status. That's also very crucial. A few years ago, there was a group of countries that tried to force to adopt a blasphemy law to cover all UN member countries. And IHEU came up with a counter paper explaining why that's not going to work. So it's not just something pro forma. They actually do something good with it. Okay, the Humanist Society, we set up in 2011. That's about 7 years ago. And it's for people in Singapore who are without religion or supernatural beliefs. So we accept anyone who says, they don't have any beliefs whatsoever. And we are the member of the IHEU. So that's the picture of the founding group in Starbucks, 2010. That's me 8 years and 20 kilograms ago. So that's how we started the Humanist Society. So that in a nutshell is what humanism and the words. So I hope you guys, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, we'll now be moving into the panel discussions, and we're going to start with the first panel discussion. I'm going to take a little bit of time to introduce our speakers. We'd also like to invite them to make their way up. First up, Ronald Lange. Dr. Ronald Lange is a medical doctor specializing in hematology. Now, prior to his private practice, Ronald taught University College Hospital Medical School in London and at HK University as well. He's also the member of Singapore National Medical Research Council. Ronald is an accredited mediator of Regent University London. He also has completed 137 massive open online courses on STEM subjects, philosophy, and other humanities. Now, his current interest is in the study of complexity and emergent phenomenon. Now, our next panelist, Reverend Massey, has been serving as the full-time pastor of Free Community Church since he was ordained by the Metropolitan Community Churches in 2011 after completing his Master in Divinity at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. Now, he believes that while religion has often been the cause of conflict and oppression, it can also be a source of strength, hope, and an agent for change. He has been actively involved in interfaith work since his seminary days and hopes to add to the voices that dispel the distrust and hate so prevalent when people talk about other beliefs. Our next panelist, Shiva Rai, consultant by day, rock star by night, Hindu by choice, interfaith dude by default. Shiva leverages on a 7,000-year-old tradition to provide insight into problems plaguing modern Singapore. Now, he has been active in the... What's going on? He has been active in the Hindu volunteerism since he was 16 and supported the IRO and IRCC in multiple interfaith events. He's also founded SG Hindu, which is a platform for local Hindu events and the voice for Singaporean Hindus. Chihao, could I get some help with this, please? Thank you. Okay, our moderator, Mathia Lee. Now, Mathia Lee is a public health research specialist with interest in the well-being of marginalized groups. She holds a PhD in stem cell biology. Now, apart from developing public health program, Dr. Lee lectures at universities, community organizations, and conferences. In her private capacity, Mathia contributes to community research and dialogue. She's also served as a facilitator for interfaith dialogues with explorations into faith since 2009. Championing dialogues on sexuality, gender, and domestic violence. Now, our second last panelist, Darren Mock, is currently pursuing his BA in linguistics at NUS. Now, an ex-atheist turned Muslim, he hopes to see an inclusive Singapore that embraces it beyond simple tolerance. A language lover, he also enjoys learning languages and sees it as an important way to connect with people on a deeper level. Now, he's also attended interfaith. Okay, I'm going to continue. Interfaith as well as intra-faith events and sees religion as a powerful force for good. And our last panelist, Teh Pei Ching, is a meditator, and a practitioner of the Eightfold Path. Similar? Yes? No? Not quite. And with his wife as well as his two kids. Now I'm going to bring the microphones up so that Mathia can get this started.
Shifted.
Maybe face each other more.
Oh, I like the limelight. Sorry. Will you be in there? Okay. Yeah, we share one mic. Yeah. Because Matthew will need the mic.
Hi, a very good afternoon, everybody, and it's really great to see such a huge crowd today. Glad to be part of this whole panel. I think you can see a lot of shaking of hands. We are all also getting to know each other today, so I think it'll be really interesting that we're coming here together, without our past impressions of each other, hence maybe no prejudice, and really that openness to hear what each other has to say. Thank you so much, Shamima, for having gone through all the introductions. I was like, okay, this is really small letters. I better read properly and not call anybody the wrong thing. So really thank you for that. How it's going to be this afternoon, I think let's keep it very conversational. Let's keep it very discussive. Let's keep it not so courteous, not so polite, and have a good conversation with each other. We're going to start by just inviting each of them to say, maybe 3 to 5 minutes of some of their thoughts, maybe a little bit more description about themselves. But I think then we move on to the more exciting part, which is the open conversation, where we will invite people like yourselves, not like yourselves, to just stand up and ask questions, maybe make a comment, and then we can really have that interesting dialogue. And then I think the next panel will be coming up later on, and perhaps having a response to the earlier discussion. Okay, so I'm going to keep quiet now and give them as much airtime as possible. This panel will focus on the topic of differences, conflicts within or between different religions. And perhaps one of the things I've asked a few of them to think about is what might some of these myths or mistaken beliefs be that others have of your religion that might have contributed to this kind of conflicts. Okay, in other words, if we put it in less polite terms, why do your fans love you and why do your haters hate you? Who would like to start first? Or shall we go in order?
Okay, I wasn't prepared for that because I wasn't quite sure how to talk about other religions. But I will tell you one life experience of how I look at religion I'm a medical doctor. I'm a specialist in blood disease. I had a patient who was about 80 years old, whom I've been seeing on and off for a number of years. He was a foreigner. He would come in his flowing white robe, a white cap, and followed by retinue. Obviously, a very respectable, highly respected person. One day, I received a phone call, and he was in another hospital. I was asked to go there to see him. When I went to see him, he was in ICU on hemodialysis, respirator. He was receiving a drip with medicine that maintains his blood pressure because his heart is not doing well. Blood test shows his liver functions were totally goyang, and he was unconscious. So I talked to the family. I said, this is a medical situation of what we know as multi-organ failure. Now, obviously, the family was a Muslim family. And I then switched, how do I communicate in the framework of the family that the family can understand? And I was so fearful of offending them. They come from overseas. So I said, I think the family tonight should come together, pray to the Almighty, and ask one question. Is the Almighty trying to get him back? But our technology is holding that back. Having said that, the nurse actually saw. And that night, the family decided to give up. And a month later, I think I had the highest accolade in my life. The family came to see me and said, Doctor, we think you are a Sufi. The family, I didn't realize that venerable old man was the leader of a Sufi sect somewhere. And I can't reveal too much because it's a confidentiality. But what I'm trying to say is this. There are so many differences in religions that we can make statements that upset other people. But why are these sensitivities there? Now, I was sensitive enough to know how to approach this particular family and talk in his dialect. To me, religion is myths. I do not use the term myth in a derogatory sense. To me, myth is, what I mean by myth is, it is not historically, not physically, not scientifically true. But it is true to a lot of people in the psychological sphere. And to quote Joseph Campbell, a very famous person who studied a lot of myths, and he said of myths, myths are necessary because it grants continuity and stability to a culture. They are present guidelines for living and gives meaning to life and explain the unexplainable. Now, when Catherine Lim was talking about all that, it's all very intellectual, but how many of us can actually attain that intellectual sense? We need guidance to deal with the existential threats that we all face in our life, whether you are black, blue, yellow, white, or whatever. The existential ideas are there, and the myths are there to deal with. And it's very interesting that Joseph Campbell also said, with that one picture of the moon rise, Earth rise, taking a picture of the Earth coming out of the moon, he made one statement. That was in 1967. He said, with the shattering of the Abrahamic myths, there will be a rise in atheism, which is true, and rise in fundamental religion, which is also true. The intellectual approach cannot deal with what we're seeing now in America, in the Deep South. It cannot deal with what we're seeing in the Middle East. Because these people cannot grasp the intellectual side. They need the myths. When the myths is shattered, what do? They protect the myths and retreat into fundamentalism. And this is where the shattering of it. And so when we talk about the difference in religion, I don't want to attack any particular religion in the real sense of the word, but I just want to say in one word, a lot of it is myths, and if only people can look at myths not as something derogatory, but as something necessary to guide our lives, then I think we'll have a better world.
Thank you, Dr. Ronald, for that very positive opening about how even this kind of differences can be bridged through, that understanding of what myths are and relating to people as people first from the heart, it seems, when you first approach that family. Thank you. So let's move on to Reverend Mack.
I really appreciate what Dr. Ronald Lange said just now about myths, because myths are stories that we tell ourselves over and over again that probably haven't happened before, historically, but they happen over and over again. They are not true as in one occasion that's happened, but they are stories that happen over and again, and we can reflect on those stories and how they give us meaning in some way. But I told Matthew just now, I'm going to stir things up a little bit, because I think that we want to talk about differences, and I suspect that in this room we are more like-minded than otherwise. I mean, after all, I'm the gay pastor who most Christians in general will have an issue with me being gay. And I don't know if we are we are quite likely a self-selecting group too. We are more likely to be able to sit comfortably and engage in conversation with someone with a different belief system from us. But I would like to say some things that I get very irritated by my own people, right? The things that I don't like going to is attending to funerals, especially funerals, that are held by more conservative Christian churches. They seem to be an occasion not to remember the dead and to help people grieve, but a recruitment drive to ask you to join the faith. In my training, I find that utterly disrespectful and utterly not Christian at all. That occasion is meant to be an occasion to remember the life of the person who has passed on and to celebrate that life. And in my tradition as a Christian, to remember God's presence in this person's life. Not as a recruitment drive and not for an occasion to tell you, we are going to heaven and you are going to hell. But that was my experience in many of these funerals. I think it's not Christian. I think it's theologically unsound. And I think that there's this thing that I always wonder. You know what? For many of my co-religionists, right? The idea of heaven and hell is very important. And very often, if I'm going to heaven, those people who don't share my beliefs are going to hell. Because I suspect that, like what Dr. Ronald said just now, the shattering of myths, in this age where we are exposed to many different worldviews, we retreat away. And when you are not certain, when you are uncomfortable, and we need to hold on to something that you need to have absolute certainty about something, it gives you security. But security is an illusion. No one can give you 100% guarantee on anything, I think. Likewise, when people ask, and very often I've been asked a question because I'm gay, are you really saved? That's the favorite question I get asked from many Christians, right? And I go, I don't know. I don't know, because that is part of faith. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is realizing that, you cannot do anything about that doubt, but have faith. The opposite of faith is not doubt, but absolute certainty. If I'm absolutely certain of something, I don't need faith. And that's what some people, religious people are grabbing hold on, because they need to have that certainty without realizing certainty is counterintuitive. It is not, it is dogma, doctrine, and maybe a construct of how religion as an institution is used to police and control people. I don't think religion truly represents the deities or the gods that they professed all the time. I don't think any religion will dare to claim that, because religion in itself is a human construct and it's full of flaws. But in it, I think, there are times that we see some glimpse of truth in some way. I would say that, in some way I share a lot with the humanists from the approach to dealing with things. And so I want to leave with the thought that I think that sometimes people who are conservative, and those of you who study psychology, and I did my stint with one module in business school, conservative bias is that when you're presented evidence for one thing, you are unwilling to let go and change your ideas or your opinions about something. And that's also the textbook or the dictionary definition of conservatism. When faced with something, evidence that proves you otherwise, you are not willing to make that change in thinking. And I think that conservatism comes from the need to be absolutely certain and absolutely secure, and the lack of security. The people who are actually the most zen and the most calm, whether you meet the Dalai Lama or you meet Archbishop Desmond Tutu, they're the ones who exude a certain calmness and peace. When you ask them some question, they will tell you, I don't know. And they answer that I don't know with that kind of, that kind of spirit that is very much against what I think is the heart of fundamentalism in many religions today. And I think that that's a conversation that we need to have, and a conversation that we need to have with one another to learn more about each other. Yeah, so I end with a quote because I have from the Vietnamese monk, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, in a room of 1,000 Buddhists, there are 1,000 Buddhisms. And likewise, I will say in Christianity, even in my church, if there are 100 people in my church, there are 100 Christianities, because all of us practice our faith in slightly different ways. But I want to help ask and hope that as we practice different beliefs, that we are not dogmatic about it, that we are not holding on to something that's absolutely certain, but we have that space to be unsure, that space to not know everything, and that space to open ourselves up to learn from each other.
Hi, so I'm Darren. I was an atheist and now I'm Muslim. So as a Muslim, I believe in one God, right? But to add on to what Miak has said, do I believe in one Islam? I don't. Because, I mean, in a similar vein to what you have said, right? Every single individual experiences spirituality or any kind of belief system individual to that person. So even in humanism, I think it's vague, as has been mentioned, because there are so many types of humanism, because there are so many types of people. And I come from a background where I was pretty strong as an atheist, like I was pretty militant about some ideas. And I was very firmly anti-theist. So I wasn't atheist in that sense. I was atheist in the dictionary sense. I was anti-theist. And now I'm Muslim. So differences in belief, I think, definitely exist. And sometimes they're just irreconcilable, I think. Like, you cannot make them work together. But people can work together, I think. So differences don't necessarily mean something bad, I think. That's my view on differences, and differences exist not only between belief systems, but within belief systems. So Islam, for example, has got quite a few sects, as I think Catherine mentioned. It's worldwide, it spans geography, it spans history. And in some of these places, the Islam that we know in Singapore is pretty different from the Islam practiced in some other parts of the world. But these differences, I don't think amount to something that's horrible in humanity. I think that it's diversity that's beautiful. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic in saying this, but I definitely think that diversity and differences should be celebrated. Of course, notwithstanding things that we just kind of universally agree to be horrendous, right? As my background kind of put me in two different opposing camps. It's easy for me to say that differences are just something that we have to live with. But I think that in working together in conversations like these, we accept differences, and I don't agree with speech that try to kind of overly focus on similarities between belief systems, because sometimes they just don't exist. But why do they have to, right? I can believe in consumption of meat. A vegan may be vehemently opposed to that. But that's not a bad thing. I think that we can live together. I think that we can agree on other things, and I think that we can agree to disagree on this particular point. So I think that more conversations like these are important, but the point of these talks, not to insinuate that the point of this talk is to try to gloss over differences, but I think that generally speaking, as people, we have to start being able to embrace differences between people without compromising your own. I mean, as someone who, I speak for myself when I say this, as someone who has come to terms with religion, who has come to terms with God, hearing sometimes speech that some might deem blasphemous might make me uncomfortable, but I should respect that, and I do. And I think that that's something that's very important and might be missing, which lead to fundamentalism, right? And I think, like you mentioned, right, sometimes it's for some reason easier to speak to someone from a completely different belief system than someone from your own. That is so true, and that's so annoying, right? Like, there are so many different forms of belief between a singular religion. We just term them like, one religion, and yet these rifts sometimes make, for some reason, this overarching umbrella term makes it easier for us to hate on each other within that umbrella term, which is just sad. I think it's sad. A lack of diversity, a lack of understanding of these fundamental human differences of individuality, basically, are very dangerous, and that can lead to fragmentation within a community. And I say this, I'm mostly informed more about maybe intrafaith matters within the Singaporean community. So the Islam here is largely Sunni, and yet there do exist minorities as well. And yet sometimes you hear very very depressing comments and sentiments against other Muslims in Singapore who maybe practice Islam slightly differently. And I think that conversations like these are important, but the underpinning spirit of realizing and accepting differences is what can really bring us forward, and not just, saying that, no, we all believe in the same thing. Because sometimes there really are differences. But how we approach this difference, how we view this difference is, I think, key. Yeah.
Hello. Is this the voice of God? It sounds pretty good. So I think I'm going to be controversial. Since the line of today is free thinking and rationalism, I feel that the first three speakers we've kind of gone around the differences a bit. And I would make an attempt to kind of put a difference out there, and y'all feel free to reject me. I'm very excited about today. I'm so excited because I've always wanted to come to a humanist event ever since I read Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Daniel Dennett is my favorite, double D's out there. One fan, thank you very much. If y'all ever have an event on Daniel Dennett, I'll be at the front holding up like consciousness explained, I'm such a geek. I was a skeptic at one point in time. I was like a really proud skeptic, though I was 17, so Paul might argue that this is a very bad straw man. My mom told me to do my JC work, and I was like, until you can explain to me how academia helps my future, I shall not do my homework. And then my mom turned to me and said, until you can explain to me how breathing keeps you alive, you will do your work. So in her own very simple way, she kind of explained, that life kind of happens, and we can try to be skeptic. It's very, very hard. Like Daniel Kahneman explained, there are fast systems, slow systems. It's very, very hard to be conscious and completely rational all the time. So at times, the idea of humanism and the idea of atheism, because the way our world is, we are bounded to the Enlightenment. We are bounded to thinking about 1800s and after that. But what, to me, I can value add as a Hindu, perhaps, is a tradition and a history that predates that. And they're finding ways and means and thinking about ideas now and historical discoveries where there's a possibility out there that Hinduism might have affected Greek, Iranian, Western thought, and that sort of way, right? So one of the first things I can offer is the term that we discussed earlier about humanism, right? Which will come from the root word man. And in Sanskrit, the word man is termed as manav. Manav, man, the similarities are very, very obvious, right? And that can be traced linguistically, Darren might agree, to the Indo-Aryan languages. They haven't really figured it out, but something like that. The epistle in Sanskrit, the word manusya, manav, is derived from the word mana, or to think, to cognize. So when you think of Socrates' idea that only a well-examined life is worth living and that sort of thing, we can see its relationship back to a Sanskrit thought, to the Vedas, where they define humanity as your ability to think and your ability to examine life, examine data. Not necessarily in a skeptical manner, but just examine it, observe it. So, the first thing that Hinduism would have in common with humanism, and different from the other faiths, is that we don't have a founder. So if there's an open source religion out there, Hinduism would be it. And this kind of sounds kind of counterintuitive to what we think in terms of religion. But if you walk into a temple and you see the different type of gods we have, right? It will probably make sense, because you have some scary gods, you have some benevolent gods, you have some handsome gods, you have some ugly gods, some gods that don't look like me, some gods that look like me, right? Whole variation. And the whole point of it is try to mirror humanity, mankind creation in its entirety, right? So a very important distinction comes here, that while Hinduism is sort of all-encompassing, they still do realize divisions and dichotomies and that sort of thing. So Hindus at some point realized that not all people in the world are Hindus, but everyone in the world is humanist, right? Which is why today I think is a great thing, because we kind of celebrate being human, right? Gratitude for being a person, which we don't think about on a day-to-day. We kind of take that for granted. I was super excited. I thought we were celebrating like some special occasion, like the day Lucy was discovered, or Prometheus first ran with the fire and then Sham spilled water on that. But still, it's a very important thing. And so Hinduism has a very clear distinction. You have to be a good man first before you do become a good Hindu. There are the yamas and niyamas. And then the yamas are a set of rules that apply to kind of mankind throughout. So telling the stuff that Gandhi spoke about, right? So telling truth, don't hurt someone else, living within your means, conspicuous consumption. Yeah. Didn't get that right, but never mind. That sort of idea. So if you think about it, the things in today's world, sort of veganism, the rising trends of vegetarianism, all these are based on compassion. We won't think being truthful and telling honest things isn't a monopoly of Hindus. It's a monopoly of humans in general. We wouldn't want to hang out with a friend who lies to us all the time, right? So there's this distinction there to begin with. But even though it's an open source religion, right? How many coders in the house? How many of you program? 3? Wow, Skills Future isn't working for us, huh? Oh, yeah, you have done 137 courses, which I did the maths is 4 degrees, so I'm speaking way more than I should at the moment. But we all know that we in an open source system to program, you need a set of rules. And Hinduism has those set of rules. They are called, they have set of rules pertaining to logic, pertaining to experience, pertaining to the tradition. How you think about the human experience. So when we describe faith in Hinduism, it's the faith that you have when you go to a school. And we have quite a lot of PhDs in the house, right? 50% of PhDs don't complete their PhDs. 50% of doctorate students don't complete your doctorate studies. So why would you do your PhD? You flip a coin and you might fail it. But it's that faith. You think you might discover it. You might hit it. There's 50% chance that you might hit it. So that's the sort of faith Hinduism talks about. It's a knowledge-seeking kind of faith. And so if we look at the tradition from this open source perspective, there are some things that come about, very strange things that come about. For one, for a 7,000 current scholarly estimates, for a 7,000-year-old tradition, we have never actually committed genocide. Pretty impressive, I would think. If I was running Hinduism, 7,000 years you give me. It is very plural and open. So we spoke about many Islams, many Christianities. In the Rig Veda itself, they're spoken about ekam sat bahu vipra vidanti. Means truth is one, paths to it many. But of course, paths to it many, it's with some distinction. Not all paths, some paths within constraints lead to some supernatural concept, idea, enlightenment. Whether it's supernatural or supranatural, like understanding my breath. If I don't understand it, it seems magical. If I understand it, it makes sense. But even still, the sort of acceptance a doctor has about human life, that sort of understanding, we can discuss about it. And there's a long, long history of atheism and Hinduism. And this will astound you. This will astound you. There were people, it's one of the philosophies of Hinduism that don't exist anymore. There were people who were completely happy doing all the rituals of Hinduism, but they don't believe in God. So they literally thought that if you go to the temple, you did these things, I don't know how it happens, but I'll get all the fame, money, power, etc., etc., etc. How does the modern atheist or humanist reconcile that? And so there are a lot of discussions within Hinduism itself about theism, atheism, if we are both vegetarian and I believe that we are some way magically connected and if I kill a cow and next life I'll come back as a cow, but you do it out of compassion, is our endpoints the same? And does our belief make a difference? And it's all very, very confusing. It's very, 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 very confusing. And so that's something perhaps atheists and humanists need to think about, that if you guys also existed as a body of knowledge for the next 7,000, 8,000 years, how is it going to exist? Because we can assume that technology and science will keep us there all the way, but here's a very scary thought from Hinduism. Here's a very, very scary thought. That at some point, all our history in Hinduism point to magical things, things that should not make sense. They are if you go to a certain place in India right now, in the Kurukshetra war, and some of you might know this, when Oppenheimer first blew up the atom bomb, the first thing he said, go YouTube this, is the creepiest thing you'll ever see. Some people were laughing, some people were crying. But to me, the line that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. Such a distinct description of what a world-ending weapon would look like, stuck with the person who first discovered the atomic bomb. The premise is this: even if you're the top of civilization, if your methodology, your technology, your economics has figured it out, there may be a time you may not be the top of the world. How does that descent of civilization happen is a very important thing that we need to think about. Because it might be happening in front of our eyes now, and we don't even know it's happening. So, the issue of figuring out the programming code of Hinduism is, you got to have logic, you got to have experience, and you got to stick to the tradition in some way or form. And if you do these three things, some very weird discoveries come about, which to me don't make sense. right? So some of you might have seen Cosmos, Carl Sagan. How many of you have seen Cosmos, Carl Sagan? I love that guy in the corner. I love you, man. You like Daniel Dennett, Cosmos, Carl Sagan. Love him in the blue shirt. But Carl Sagan says a point. In the Dark Ages, when the Europeans were thinking about the world in thousands of years, Mayans were thinking about the world in millions of years. Hindus were thinking about the world in billions of years. Our cosmology spans that long. You go to a Hindu temple, you go to Perumal temple, you will see the 12 avatars of Vishnu, right? All of them in chronological order of evolution. So you have a fish, you have a turtle, you have a mammal, and so on and so forth. How does a guy sitting in a forest in some rural part of India come up with stuff like that? So these are all things in the past. A more modern example would be someone like Ramanuja, rural Indian kid who recreates 1,000 years of Western mathematical thought independently. And how does he do it? He claims Goddess Saraswati came to him and told it to him in a dream. The people at Oxford and Cambridge were laughing at him. And of course, he couldn't take the stress. He was vegetarian, blah, 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 so on and so forth. He died at the tender age of 34. But one thing we must decide as a humanity, as a congregation, there are some samples that we'll like, some samples we don't like. We are very keen to take away the outliers. We are very keen to say that something like Ramanuja, sampling size problem. If you stay around in humanity for 100,000 years, there'll be a couple of guys like Ramanuja who believe this. But I urge you, as a collective, as I think humanism is the foremost thought today, because if you look around the room, most of the room is extremely well-read and extremely well-educated. That perhaps we can look back to tradition to find a bridge to figure out what is the sample size to look at. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Shiva. So I will just give a very short, brief introduction because I realized that my bio was the shortest and probably not the most explanatory. I think what's pertinent for everyone to know is that actually I studied, talking about like going to the other end of the world, I studied in Houston, Texas, in the middle of the Bible Belt. So I know very much about like the group of people who are not here in this room, to put it that way. In fact, one of my memories from university was that I was staying in my friend's cousin's place. And later on that same evening, my friend came to me and said, PJ, I'm really sorry to say this, but my cousin actually asked me a question. Is your friend from the East? And my friend said, yeah, he's from Singapore. And it's like, well, why do you ask, right? And the cousin replied, well, because according to the Bible, the devil will come from the East. And I told my friend, I was not so compassionate back then. I told my friend, well, you should tell your cousin that the world is round, so you go east far enough, you come back to the same place, right? Yeah. But I mean, those are the kind of experiences where, like what Darren was saying about, like, when you're exposed to something that is completely different from you, and that's really where you grow. And what struck me was, actually, I'm not that different from her. You know, I might be very rational and so forth, but actually, if I'm challenged, you know, when I'm faced with something that challenges my belief systems, the emotional reaction will be that of the same. It will be that of like fear, it will be that of like bewilderment and so on and so forth. And while we are supposed to be talking about differences of beliefs, right, actually one thing I do want to emphasize before I talk about that is that it's actually very important for us to not overlook the commonalities. Another story that I have from my university days, my roommate in my first year was an Israeli. His maternal grandfather was in the Papal, which, for those who know, they were like the World War II Jewish commandos, right? And he lost his arm. So, come the Six-Day War, when Israel took over Jerusalem for the first time, and my friend's mother went with her father to visit the Wailing Wall for the very first time in their lives. They saw a group of Israeli paratroopers like bullying an old Arab man, and they saw this man, like, you know, old Arab man being pushed over by these Israeli paratroopers. And this guy, being a Palmach veteran, right, he went over and he gave them a piece of his mind. He's like, what the hell are you doing? And so on and so forth. And they were extremely agitated, clearly, because it was just the war just finished, and they pushed him over too. So, as my friend's mother went to help her father up, her father, he had actually lost one arm in the War of Independence, the father actually said to my friend's mom, do you remember what they teach you in school about like good Arabs and bad Arabs? And apparently in Israeli schools back then, they talk about like, oh, the good Arabs are the Druzes who are the allies of the Israelis and so forth. And she's like, yeah, I know about the good Arabs and bad Arabs. And he said to her at that point in time, never ever remember that. There is no such thing as a good Arab and a bad Arab. There are only good and bad men. And that's one thing I want to bear in mind. It doesn't matter whether you're Israeli Jew, Israeli labor union, or whatever it is, right? There are these commonalities across all of us that when you see compassion on the streets, right? Like there was the beautiful quote that Paul Tobin put up from the Tirukau thing. An act of compassion, an act of kindness that's not solicited. It's wonderful. And any religion or any belief, anyone who sees that, you will like recognize that. So that was the other story that I took away from my university days, which I thought was like really wonderful. But how is it I ended up on like the path of like being a Buddhist was a bit of I went around like one circle, same as my comment about the world, right? Because I grew up in a Buddhist, Taoist, Rojak kind of like family. And what happened was when I had my very first girlfriend who was Christian and who was in one of these charismatic churches, whom I think deliberately go and recruit like attractive young girls for that reason. I went to my parents and I told my mom, like, I want to be a Christian. And her immediate response, right, was that of a typical Singaporean housewife. She said, you go shopping, do you buy the first thing you see? You don't, right? So you go and do your research first, then you decide, okay? So I was like, okay, that makes sense. You can't really argue that. I mean, like, Singaporean mothers cannot argue with them anyway. So I was like, okay, sure. So I went to go and dig up about all the other religions, right? And it was like, okay, I read about like, Islam, I read about like Judaism, I read about like, Hinduism, Christianity, and so forth. I was like, wow, this is really quite complicated. And then I was like, okay, Buddhism came last because I mean, it's like something I grew up with, right? You go and see the Kuan Yin all the time. Then I read about it, it's like, wow, this is completely different from what I actually understood. And that's when I realized that what we commonly think of as like Buddhism, right? Oh, it's a big golden temples and so forth. Do you know that one of the myths is that actually nobody really knows how the Buddha looked like? Because for the first 100+ years, right, in fact, you can go and dig it up on the internet, but for the first 100 years after the Buddha passed away, the Buddha in all the Indian art, right, is depicted as a tree, a wheel, an empty chair. And in fact, if you read the Buddhist text called the Suttas, there was a famous king who came to visit the Buddha, and he went into the hall, and then he turned to the guy and said, who is the Buddha? Which means, right, actually, that the Buddha looked just like any other normal monk. He's not the guy who you see in the temple that has got the afro and so forth. So yeah, the snails and the afro and the pointy head, right? That's not really that. Those are symbolisms of like wisdom and so forth. It's not really like what the Buddha looks like. So the more I dug up about it, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. But what caught me, right, was that as a person who was trained in science was, the idea of belief in Buddhism is quite different. The idea of belief, right, is really that it's not so much about belief. The word saddha, right, the Pali Sanskrit term, it actually really means more like confidence, like what you're saying. It's about like the exploration. And in Buddhism, you actually talk about, you have belief that you take on from the word of somebody who's reliable, all the way to direct experience with something. When you directly experience, you know for yourself that this is how something is. So when you say that for example, one common thing about like, Buddhists believe in rebirth, the sutras actually talk about how there are people who believe on faith, on like, I know this person and I trust the person, there's this possibility, to those who actually directly experience and recollect their own past lives. So that's the kind of like thing. And the other important thing is that in the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha gave the advice, there were these group called the Kalamas, and they had all these teachers coming by, and they're like, wow, one teacher after the other, this one says this, the other one says that, like, which one do we believe? And the Buddha actually said, test for yourself. If something leads to more peace of mind, more happiness, is more wholesome, then that's something that's good. If something doesn't lead you in that way, then that's not the right way, but you have to test for yourself. So that appealed to the empirical scientist in me, because it's a bit like you learn chemistry theory, then you have to go in and like put the stick in, and then you hear the pop. Say, oh, that's what hydrogen sounds like, right, in the lab. Same thing. So there's that degree of faith. But the other thing that I found really fascinating as well about Buddhism is that it explains why there are so many differences of views. One of the fundamental commonalities across all the Buddhist traditions is that actually what drives the world, right, are the three defilements. You call them lust or craving or wanting, anger or ill will, and the third one is actually that of delusion. And these are actually fed by the three kinds of sensory sensations you get. So we talk about feelings in Buddhism, we're not talking about like my emotions, right? But they're say for example with sight, right? You will see something that's beautiful, that's attractive, right? That's the beautiful, good feeling. You see something that's very ugly, right? That's the negative feeling of that. And then you see something that's neutral, and you're like, okay, that's fine. And the interesting thing is that in Buddhism, greed, hatred, and delusion are fed by these three different kinds of feelings. Because what happens is that with a good feeling, you tend to be drawn into it, especially those that are created by the five senses. You tend to be drawn into it, and that actually feeds a desire for you to want to recreate that experience. With ill will, you have the desire, you want to move away from it. And then with the interesting thing is the neutral one, that it feeds delusion. I was like, how does that feed delusion? And the reason why it feeds delusion is because you're indifferent, you don't care. And you don't investigate further. So that was like, when I read all this in like Buddhism, I was like, wow, this actually kind of like makes sense to me. So, and it also, in my mind, explains like why there are all these differences of views, right? Because people tend to get attached to things, they tend to like, develop ill will, and then when they see something that's like, okay, this sounds about there, but you know what, I'm not interested, they don't investigate further as a result of that. So that's my end of my spiel, I guess.
So a very warm thank you to the panel for sharing all their views. Actually, I'd like to also share a little bit of a personal reflection from the panel today and from our earlier speakers. So one of the things that people often believe about religious people is that humanists or secularists, rationalists are rational people. But, maybe religious people are superstitious people. But I think one thing I really got from the panel today was really a 5 to 10 minute articulation for all the reasons why they chose a particular belief. Even, just now from our guest speaker, Dr. Catherine, she started off by telling you why she decided to go from Taoism to go on to Catholicism and then adopting humanism. And I don't think it's about, what is she, but how did she actually go through that whole thought process her experience. And I think that also came out with each of these speakers. And I think, this is a multi-faith panel of speakers, and each one of them had such a long history of thinking through and experiencing and making sense of that whole experience. And on the other hand, we have a very common myth as well about how people without theistic beliefs, and this is really in the media, I don't think any of our speakers think that way, is that, people without religion are all very evil and they have no meaning in life, and how are they going to be good citizens if they have no beliefs? I think, again, this entire room and this entire panel shows that it's not true. So it's really nice to see the busting of two myths that we often have in Singapore. So with that, I'd like to open up to the floor and invite you to continue poking, being controversial. Maybe I should just remind everyone a bit about some of the controversies that have been happening. I think everyone, so far I didn't hear this. Maybe they forgot about it. So, we had things like, in the distant past, I can't believe it's a distant past already, but the Aware Saga was a huge thing. We had Penguin Gate. Recently, even a picture of a man sitting on a chicken was very strangely interpreted. And so we have a lot of this kind of controversies, perhaps, but we also have the day-to-day controversies. Why do people who are going to that mosque/church/temple, why they park until I got no space to park? I'm going to complain to traffic police. Or why do people like to burn things? I'm okay with their religion, I don't care, but why do they do this? Or why do they force me to eat this? A lot of practical day-to-day conflicts. I think this is something that tends to be a source of friction among people who say, I don't care, I don't want to attend all these kind of talks. I just want to live my life. Why do they have to impose on me? And then we say, no, you have to understand each other. But they're like, so these are just examples. I'd like you to, explore why. This first session will help to explore why conflicts happen, so that in the next section, we will make it harder for them to come up with the solutions to address this whole myriad of different problems, yeah? Okay, so who wants to be the first?
Just a quick note before we start the Q&A. If for any reason you wish to remain anonymous, you don't want your face, your picture, or video recording to be taken, please state that as you come up here. We'll ensure that the cameras don't come to you. We're also hoping to wrap this up in about 15 to 20 minutes so that we have time for the next panel. So come on up if you have a question, please.
Okay, I didn't realize it's 20 minutes. I thought it was 40 minutes. I think we had a lot. 25 minutes. We always love to compromise this way. So maybe what I'll do is this. Perhaps I'll just take two questions and 3 questions at a time so that people can, the panel can address more holistically. And I'll invite you, while you please don't have to introduce yourself if you don't feel comfortable, but do give us a bit of context about your question, because I think a lot of times it's the context that affects, things.
Sorry, may I raise a controversy since you asked?
Sure.
Sorry, I know you were trying to get the floor, but because when he was talking, it just occurred to me about control. I have many Muslim friends, and I often eat with them. But there have been a few, if we're eating in whatever, I order some pig dish, and the person will say, you are disrespecting me. Now, how does one deal with that? In my meaner moments, I would then like to say, I'm now a vegetarian, you should respect me and not even eat any meat. But is that a right approach?
Thank you for putting out such a real example that I'm sure it's not unique to yourself, but people have experienced that. I saw a hand over there. Let's take maybe 2 or 3.
Darren, do you want to take that question first? Or? Okay.
We'll have 2 or 3 questions. It's really in the interest of time, so that, related questions, perhaps. Yep.
I'll throw this out to all the panelists. I'm trying to find, where does the balance fall fairly? Some of the panelists have alluded to the positive points of religion, and I don't doubt they exist. There are some positive points. But will they actually justify the slaughter of tens of thousands of millions of people in religious wars? Will they justify the suppression of scientists, remembering that Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake? Will it justify the subordination of women? We've had 2,000 years to evaluate it, right? Okay, I've got an old Sociology 101 textbook that says the purpose of religion is education in morality. It's an important concept, education in morality. Has it succeeded? Well, let's take a look at the most religious countries in the world. They should be the most moral if it succeeded, right? United States, it's the most Christian country in the world. There's churches all over the goddamn place. Are they moral? No, they're dropping bombs and missiles all over the place. What about in the Muslim world? You got Saudi Arabia. Is that a bastion?
All right, so that's a huge thing for the panel to be addressing.
Is it a particularly moral country? Well, ask the Yemenis today. No, religion, frankly, has been a failure for thousands of years, and it's time we woke up and realized it. We should kick it in the ass, throw it on the trash heap of history, and the sooner we bury it, the better we're all going to be.
Thank you. So we've got eating together, we've got really down to murder in the world and trying to justify that, and how do we even balance things? Okay, I would say I see 3 speakers, 3 people, audience waiting over there. I'm going to listen to all these 3 speakers, but I'm going to ask people to just take a seat first. We'll hear from these 3 and then hear the responses, and then we'll have the next batch. Maybe I saw you first?
Hello, so I'm Jessie. I'm a student from the National University of Singapore. Thank you to all the panelists. My question was kind of more or less inspired by what Rev Massey said about faith. So it kind of got me thinking, because if faith by nature is supposed to carry doubt, But for the Humanist Society, at least from what I briefly understood, it's more of a matter, a belief in facts, a belief in evidence, and in a sense, a belief in scientific truths that like barely everything we think or do. But like in that approach, in the humanist approach, can it also be possible to believe in the scientific method, but to also have a lot of doubt? Yeah, that's my question. So any panelists who would like to answer that, please go ahead.
Excellent, thought-provoking question. Thank you. Maybe you can take a seat while we, yeah?
Hi, my name is Fahima. I run an activist group called Hashbase, dealing with religious extremism and countering it with multiculturalism as a counter-narrative. I wouldn't say question, my problem is with the way you have defined the humanist, because when I come here, I actually thought, I'm a Muslim, I have a faith as into this divine intervention that guides my moral behavior, but I'm also a humanist because I believe in compassion and learning. So does one have to be either humanist or a person with a religious faith? Or, because it looks to me like by defining humanist, you have created another segment of how moral guidance should be behaved. So I'm just a bit like disturbed by the definition that I learned today, because I thought the word, you are kind of monopolizing the word human, so that's what I felt. So and then my next question relating to that is, how would you then differentiate belief and faith? Is it just this doubtful thing then? Because then it doesn't seem like as if, because to me, belief and faith, I don't see a lot of difference. It looks synonymous, but is it not? Is that the way? Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Hello, my name is Reese. I'm from the Council of Ex-Muslims of Singapore, and my question is actually directed towards Darren, because as an ex-Muslim, I find it interesting that someone would want to join the religion that I left. So my question to you is, what exactly is it about Islam that enticed you to join? And the second question is pertaining to what Dr. Ronald said earlier about the controversy with regards to respecting people's food choices. Myself, especially, I have a dietary restriction. So it's kind of hard for me to get the kind of food that I can eat. And Subway used to be the only place that I could go to where I could get a few slices of bacon without having to buy a whole packet to bring home to my Muslim family and put it inside the fridge, which would disrespect them. So how do you feel about a lot of fast food chains or just eateries going halal and making it hard for people who want to eat pork?
Thank you for that question. I love how he just took one simple meal to become a whole policy issue about all fast food chains. All right. Okay, which of our panel would like to
I think it's all on the other side. We can take a break.
Okay. Maybe if I were to just jump in to address that gentleman's point about like throwing all religions into the trash can. I think that you raise very fair points about organized religion. But I would actually argue that if you look at the history of this organized religion, and it spreads across all the mystic beliefs, across all the different traditions, right? I would argue that actually like not many like wars were fought by like, say for example, by Sufis or Christian mystics and so forth. So maybe the problem is not about religion itself, but the organization and the power that comes with it rather than, yeah.
I think your choice of words of 2,000 years was very, very telling. I think Christianity had a mystic element to it, which I think the church did away with it. The name escapes me now, but somewhere around 700 AD, 800 AD. So if you do have a mystic element to your religion, it makes it much less able to have power in it. And also, it makes it much more difficult to monopolize. I like you. In my head, you look more like what Darwin looks like. So I don't know if he should be your mascot. But I don't know if you're going for that look, but I really, really like you. And I've been thinking a lot about whether religion can be wiped out. That's actually, so I've been trying to write a story whether one day, given all that's happening in the world, one day Hinduism gets wiped out, that sort of thing. And I think my perspective of it got changed when I went to Tibet, where the population has been subjected for 30 years, no religious practice, and it hasn't been wiped out. So I don't know how to answer your question, but perhaps you could use the thought experiment that I have and see if you find answers. And I'll love to have dinner with you someday. And it'll be very interesting to discover that. Thank you.
It has been said, in the days of before the mathematical symbols were discovered, it was discovered around 14th, 15th century. The progress in mathematics was very, very slow because there was no language to deal with mathematics. But once the symbols were discovered, the plus, minus, division sign, mathematics started growing very fast. And it has been said that our existential problems, we don't have a language to deal with it. And therefore, we have this mythical language in religion to deal with it. And there's no language. We all have to deal with this problem. And this is where I think Joseph Campbell, in his studies of mythologies, is shown light on this. And therefore, I think there is no way religion will disappear in the sense of our personal approach to the existential questions. I give you one example. All faces. My young son, 4 years old, one day we were out in the garden, and we looked up and saw all the stars, and all of a sudden he said, "I am scared." That is all of a sudden a realization that we are tiny, tiny little thing in this vast cosmos, and how we deal with that. So this mythical language of religion is probably necessary for us to deal with our life. So in that sense, it cannot get away. Now, I want to ask you.
I'm gonna have to just pause a little bit because I remember there were 4 questions, a lot of very deep ones. I'm gonna try and give response time for other questions. Yeah, I think Darren.
Hi. Okay. So wonderful points. Sorry, yeah, this is working. So wonderful points. I might need some reminder for some specific questions, but I'm going to talk about the halal issue. So basically, food consumption. So this is a point that irks me. Not your question. Okay, like the people who do what you mentioned, those people irk me as well, because I'm a convert. So at home, I'm the only one who adheres to the Muslim food dietary restrictions. And I would never ask someone to alter their dietary preferences for me. And that to me is just extremely tyrannical, But perhaps that's because of my own background in me having chosen a particular religion to operate within. I don't think that religion teaches people to force things onto others. In fact, this is of course very Islam-centric, but when I was converting, like the one verse in the Quran that was kind of repeatedly taught to me was there's no compulsion in religion. And so it irks me a lot when I hear these stories, and they definitely occur when people say, like you've mentioned that, I don't eat pork, so you shouldn't eat pork in front of me. And I think that that's a completely valid response to offer them, So I don't eat meat, then you don't eat in front of me, lor. Right? Like I think that's a very valid rebuttal to their kind of logic. And in a similar vein, you see a similar thing happening, so not just across religions, so between halal and non-halal, but also within the religion, again, within the religion, during, for example, the holy month of Ramadan just passed, right? And you have concessions for people who, for example, women who are on the periods, they don't fast. So there are certain groups of people who don't fast throughout the entire month. And what you find is that social pressures kind of force some Muslims to still fast or to still pretend that they are fasting in order to appease those who actually are. And so I guess the question is, at what point did this personal duty that you have taken upon yourself or that was imposed onto you by your beliefs, when did this become a matter of policy, of policing others instead of yourself? So I think in Catholicism, there's a similar thing called Lent, right? I'm not particularly sure, but I think in Lent, so what some people do, what some Catholics do, is they pick something that they hold on very dearly to, and they kind of abstain from that. It sounds absurd, right? If someone who says, I'm going to stay away from alcohol for this period, and then, so everyone else around me must also stay away from alcohol during this period. That's just ridiculous. I don't agree with that at all. And I think that it's irresponsible even. You're kind of missing out on what you should be focusing on, which is your own purity, which is your own self-discipline even, and kind of forcing that onto others. And this, I mean, in the context of Singapore, it may not have as large a ramification, but I think in places like Malaysia, it takes on much stronger racial overtones. And you have people who maybe look racially ambiguous being forced to fast when they are not Muslim at all. And I mean, so there were some other questions as well. I think I can.
I'm going to actually still stay on this topic, but bring it up to another level. This whole idea of imposing, because it seems like in today's day and age, at the end of the day, a lot of issues may look different, but at the heart of it is this whole idea of me imposing on another person. I'm going to ask the question in a slightly different way. When should we impose on one another? And I'm thinking about this because I'm a public health specialist. And as a public health specialist, well, let's put it this way. If I realize that, hey, this can of whatever food somehow is tainted with toxins and antibiotics, I have the obligation to start imposing on everybody and telling my loved ones, can you please don't buy this and stop eating this and don't feed it to my kids? Or if I'm going into schools and the school is adopting a practice that's not good for the children, giving them more, hand, foot, and mouth disease, I think any parent would sweat at this, right? We have an obligation to impose and tell that parent, don't bring your child to school anymore. Or if I am at the airport or in the train station and I overhear someone talking about a bomb in the toilet, I can either choose to tell myself, or maybe I overheard wrongly, he's just talking about random current affairs, but I have the obligation to also report it because the plane might blow up. So if in a religious context, now I truly believe that eating animals is gonna be harming them and I wanna save a sentient being, okay, I'm using this because fuzzy, little cute furry animals tend to make us, empathize more, but there are a lot of other examples. How can we not impose if we believe in something so much that it is for the good of the world and for each other?
I think that the important question is actually that what is the starting point of the person who is doing that imposition? And in what you described, when you have a public health issue, right, the intention is to prevent harm, right? But if it is an imposition because the intention is that, I feel a bit like squeamy about it, right, and then I want to do that, then I think that the justification is probably like a lot lower compared. So it really, there's no single like a blanket that would like rule for that. But I think that the intention would be the key starting point for that. And in Buddhism, the belief or karma, right, like the roots of it actually starts with like what is the intention behind that. So while there are a lot of myths out there, like things that, for example, like there's a blanket like belief that you can't kill beings and so forth. But if you actually read the Buddhist, the monastic rules, there are certain qualifications that are quite interesting. So for example, if you are fully enlightened and your body is suffering and you want to kill yourself, actually there is actually not a disrobable offense according to the Buddhist monastic code. So, and the reason is because that at that point in time, right, your intentions would be different already compared to a normal person. So there's a lot of talk about actually it's all driven by your intentions and where you're coming from that determines that.
More than that, there's empirical evidence. Your public health has empirical evidence that certain things will do harm to the community. Whereas if not eating pork, you will go to hell, or eating pork will go to hell. There's no empirical evidence unless somebody has come back and told you.
I wouldn't go to the area of empirical evidence, but I will agree with PJ about intention. When someone polices what you are doing, what's the intention, right? If we want to encourage people to do something because it is good for them, then, for example, if someone feels strongly about veganism and harm to sentient beings, then it is not telling you don't eat meat, but to help them reach a point of empathy with the sentient being. Then they, knowing the pain that's caused by, consuming meat to sentient beings, that will lead them to act accordingly. I think that it is not about, a lot of times the policing of people, it's about power, it's about trying to trying to earn, score points with whichever deity you ascribe to, and imposing that because you score point, or because you look righteous, or you look good in front of other people. I think that's the motivations are, when someone tries to impose, is very different. I always remember when I was talking to Imran a few years ago, not that many, but I asked, hey, I don't eat pork, I don't order. And he said, why are you bothering about it? I'm offended that you're not eating pork in front of me because you think I'm not that kind of progressive Muslim, right? It's not like I'm stuffing out, I'm not feeding him pork, I am just eating, and he's eating something else. He said, I'm offended that you want to order something else. And I think that's the question is always behind that. But I remember when I was young, when my father invited his Muslim colleague into my house, we bought a whole set of cutlery, a whole set of plates to cook and everything. It is hospitality, and the intention is not trying to score point with you, but respecting you and being hospitable. And I think that's where are our starting points? What are our intentions? Why are people wanting to police? It's all, a lot of times, power and control, and people don't realize that.
Any other response from the... Okay.
I don't think the answer at all is to impose anything on anyone. It should be up to them to make informed decisions to consume whatever they want. Like, for example, I don't take sugar at all. Like, I'm sure doctors, both of you would know that sugar has the same chemical reaction in the brain as cocaine, right? So, should we ban sugar from drinks? Should we stop kids from drinking sodas? I don't think so. I think we should vote with our wallets and tell the soda companies that, look, your stuff is not healthy and we won't buy it. That's how it is. But the main point that I was getting back at regarding the whole halalification of almost every food outlet in Singapore is it is restricting to people like me who cannot eat turkey bacon because of all the additives and fillers in it. Whereas bacon itself is just bacon.
Thank you for these very enlightened thoughts about what the whole spirit of imposing. I'm gonna shift gears slightly by reminding the speakers of I think there were a few other questions that were brought up just now about the idea of beliefs. What's the difference between belief and faith? I think whether it's compatible, or humanism and the scientific method, is it compatible, or is it faith and the scientific method, is it compatible? So let's talk about any responses to these.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the matter of belief and kind of doubt and knowing, with certainty knowing. And so I think, as has been mentioned, a key point of humanism is knowing, right? Is the scientific method, is of observing, of trying out and testing hypotheses. And there is actually a limit to that. Because there are parts of, not everyone may know this, but the concept of the observable universe is a point where so few premises, the universe is expanding, at least this is what is more or less majorly accepted within cosmologists, that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, and that at some point in time, light from distant parts of the universe is no longer going to be able to reach us. Okay, so what this means, the implications of this is that not everything is observable. So the ramifications on this for the scientific method is that not everything is testable, because not everything is knowable, basically. So I'm not a humanist, right? At least I'm not part of the Humanist Society. I don't know that much. But just talking about the scientific method, at least, there is a limitation to that just because of how the universe works. And that's kind of where I think faith and doubt comes in. And so knowing that you don't know, or that you're not able to know, is I think, a virtue in quite a few systems. And I think there needs to be acknowledgement as well. Even if you are not one who subscribes to this, or it's good to know that you don't know everything. Even if you don't subscribe to that, you kind of have to at least accede to this, that there is a physical limitation to our ability to know. Yeah, so that's my response.
Yeah, so I think that I'll take a different approach to that on this question about like faith and belief, right? And the question you have to ask yourself is like, what is that faith for, right? And if the faith is for you to be able to just answer questions like whether can you know the universe and so on and so forth, these are what the Buddha actually called like unanswerable questions. And the Buddha actually likened the famous parable of like, it's like a person who got shot by an arrow and is dying, and that as the medicine is being applied, right, the person is asking, saying that, wait, who shot me? What's his name? Can you give me his details, his IC number, and so on and so forth, right? And the Buddha is like, by the time you answer all these questions, you're dead, right? So actually, if I ask myself the question of like, what is the main purpose, right, in life, right, across everybody, is really about whether does it make you a happier and more peaceful person. Ultimately, that's really what everything points towards too. So I would actually encourage everyone to, if there's of trying to reconcile like faith and belief, test it out for yourself. That is testable, right? Because you have agency over your own life. So test it out for yourself. Try something out. If this doesn't work, okay, then try something else and so on and so forth. But it should be with the aim of actually making yourself more happy, more peaceful, less angry and so forth. So that's just my 2 cents.
I just want to reflect on that testing of it, and because oftentimes we think that there's only one model answer. We flip to the back of the assessment book, we find all the answers there. But unfortunately or fortunately, we all have different paths, and the paths might look like they are in exact opposite directions. Someone who was a Muslim and now an atheist, and an atheist becoming Muslim. And we need to be able not to be threatened by somebody who's walking the opposite direction. The opposite direction doesn't mean that, and when I say opposite direction, doesn't necessarily mean that that person is the evil and I'm the good. No, it's just we are walking different directions on the road. When you walk on the road, there are people who walk in the different direction from you, right? You're heading somewhere and they're heading from somewhere. And that is the kind of understanding that we should have. I don't think that we can get rid of religion. I wish that we could. Organized religion especially, because there's a lot of baggage, and it has been used to control, police, oppress, and do lots of things because it's all about power. And power corrupts. And people who seek power gets corrupted by the power, and it exhibits itself in so many different ways. We see that. The problem is if we get rid of people who want to lead the religions, you'll be left with those hungry, power-hungry people who will continue to control people and will make things even worse. In some way, we are the resistance to those people within our different religions, and we're speaking out to it, hoping for a different kind of future that all of us, walking our different paths in different directions, can achieve that kind of peace, that kind of life. I don't think the word is happiness. I think the kind of life that's content, that's harmonious, that's peaceful, and respecting of people who think differently, believe differently from each one of us. Oops, I'm going to the next panel's discussion already.
I'm going to say something. When Shiva said about the many gods in Hinduism and and then it reminded me of Joseph Campbell again in his magnum opus, Hero with 1,000 Faces, where his basic thesis is there's only one story. But because cultures, civilizations develop differently, so this same story will appear as different myths in different culture and civilization. So I think it's the same thing. Now, when it comes to morality, my memory is not very good because I'm now in my 70s. There's a psychologist called Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor at New York State University, and he talked about 5 proto-moral types: harm, do not kill; fairness, which is justice; in-group, our communities, tribalism; authority and hierarchy; and purity. And he says, if you look at all different sense of moralities, it's made up of these 5 prototypes. And because different civilizations, different cultures grew up, had a different experience, different types of these proto-moralities will be emphasized. And when I read that, it answered one question which I've been asking myself all the time. I go to Japan very often. I have great admirations for the civilities and so on of the Japanese. But I couldn't understand how during the war they were so awful. And then when I read that, it occurred to me, prior to the Second World War, the emphasis was on authority, on in-groupness. And therefore, to them, what they were doing was not wrong. They were obeying the emperor, the hierarchy is there, and the in-group is there. But whereas if you look at it from a different emphasis of these 5 morality senses, what they were doing was wrong. And you can see even thou shalt not kill, this famous commandment. But there's a passage in the Bible where God asked them to go and kill all the Amaleks, the dogs and cats and children and infants and so on. It's pure genocide. How can you make that compatible with the commandment of thou shalt not kill? But then if you apply Joseph Haidt's idea, thou shalt not kill comes from that proto-type of morality of doing no harm. Whereas killing the Amalekites, the genocide, that's the obeying that part of our community. So when all these things ties together, but you can't explain this to most people. Remember, the average IQ is 100. That means 50% of people has less than 100. So mythology is necessary to carry these ideas across, and this is where religion comes in.
So I have a few points, sorry. So I want to address, it kind of tied in basically. So what you were saying about testing something, right? Whether something applies to you, whether something makes you happier, makes you more content, and how this ties in with not knowing. So that actually answers kind of your question on what appealed to me in religion. Because, I mean, prior to the conversion, I was also very, I was anti-theist. And I kind of wanted to know. I wanted to know how the universe worked and all this. But a key point in actually the conversion was realizing my limits as a human being to know and accepting that there are truths that are just completely unattainable by me, simply by virtue of the fact that I am human and I am limited. And so, I mean, of course, this is not unique to Islam, I don't think. So, this might very well apply to some other people that have converted into a religion. But for my personal story, that's actually kind of a key point, a key turning point, was recognizing my limitations and recognizing the human limitation of knowing and being able to be content without knowing absolute truths.
So there seems to be a bit of discomfort about being content with that discomfort of not knowing everything, and we will not know everything. I know a lot of speakers still actually want to respond. We will not know what they want to respond because I'm cognizant of the time. But rather than just cutting here.
Sorry, can
okay.
I know we're short of time, but this slide to me is very telling. What do you think this slide is? Huh? Guan Yin. By chance, I visited something called the Hidden Christian Museum in Nagasaki. And the hidden Christians at the time of the Edo period, Tokugawa period, they were either killed, tortured, so they went underground. They were forced to be Buddhists. So they had this image. To the officials, it's Guan Yin. To them, it's Madonna and Child. So when praying to this, they were praying to Madonna and Child. Can you see how things actually work on the mind? All these things are actually in the mind. There's no objective reality. It's what you take it to be.
Thank you. So not only do we have discomfort in not knowing the response, sometimes what you see isn't even what you think you are seeing. And so with that, I'm going to close, but I'm not going to close with a summary as usual, as what people normally do. Instead, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to close by inviting floor members to actually make comment or question, and we will not have them answered. We will have these unanswered questions bring us into the break time and into the next section. So, yeah, I think we have one or two persons ready there. So it will be unanswered questions, but you can ask the questions for us all to think about it.
Thank you so much for today. I'm actually here today because I'm interested in the topic. So I'm not going against people who are religious or non-religious, but I just like to make some comment. All of you have got different beliefs and all that. I'm totally, happy that we can all come out and actually say something. As a matter of fact, I'm already pushing 50. But this thing, religion thing is a religious thing is can get to really very back of my mind. In the school days when I was studying in SCGS, I had friends who are in church. And I mean, we are so naive. We do not know what is actually all religious. So every day, I've got friends here and there, crowded and all that. I had this experience. As a matter of fact, it's a trauma. I had pocket money for $1.50 to $2. My mother would give me, and because of all these friends, they tell me every time before lunchtime, the recess time, please make good. Give me the I have to donate my pocket money, my lunch money for them, because they say that Jesus Christ is good. Jesus Christ is good. Please donate. I have done this for a period of time. And the second experience was that after school, the session was over. They bring me to Methodist Church, all the activities and all the biblical things, all the Bible study sessions. Being a person who is not professional, I'm not born a smart person, okay? Being not, I had to study through. I trusted my friends that say, okay, go to church, do good. God will help you. Your grades is going to be A+, A triple science. And Singapore, you get into NUS if you believe in Jesus Christ. So I trusted my friends, followed them all the way. Every other day, and at home, when we got back, my mother was asking, where's your pocket money? Why you never eat and all that. I believe in friends because of religion. So in the end, frankly speaking, I don't have time to do my studies. And friends around me, they're all from A class. Maybe I need to work more. So, sorry, I don't believe in that. And I'm not going against people making donations. I don't believe in asking favor for donation to churches, to temples, or that. I believe if I want to believe myself, I study very well, I do very well. I'm doing fine now, no? And it took me a very long time for me to take out this thing. It took me a very long time. It's not easy. Fortunately, I do through my means to get this thing. I have, I've got things, I'm doing well. I'm doing well now. But I need to remind all these young, educationally, all these children, please do not follow all these things. And my mother and old people say the young people go to church, the old people go to temples. And in between, you don't have a religion and all that, you have nowhere to go. I don't believe in that. I believe in myself. Ultimately, it's a study. Not just going to touch community centers, FCBC, and your grades are going to go. You're going to go NUS, master degree. No, I don't believe in that. I believe you have to plow your way through, because Singapore is a very typical. You don't need to be a really a religious person to do all grades and all that. I think this part is something you have to
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story of yourself. Thank you.
Hi, the name is Saiful. Hi, Dr. Lee, friends and panel, you beautiful people. I'm short of simplifying this whole kind of religious humanism issue. I consider myself a humanism with a small h, superscript hidden away from Muslim. So I think it's the idea of the human experience of reality, whether direct or indirect, and trying to make sense or give meaning, and then this whole symbolism and storytelling which get involved. But my question to everyone is that then what can we do with differences like as such? I want to reflect back on my personal Muslim faith, and there's this concept in Islam called fardu ain and fardu kifaya, the individual obligations and the obligations of the community or for the community. And for fardu ain is something that I have to do, so I don't really care about you. This is stuff that I need to do. But there's this idea of communal obligation for the community. And this ties in very closely to the idea of like even public health. The idea that, if you're vaccinated, that means you're going to help everyone else be healthy. Am I right, doctor? Yes, thank you very much. Validated, right? So that idea, what is that community obligation given the differences? I think Reverend Miak always say this, we got to inoculate more people to be interfaith, right? Yeah, so it's physical health and spiritual health inoculation. But that idea, like, what is that? What is that communal obligation? And then some people mention empirical data, you got to use research and stuff. So I will question that by asking this. Empirical data shown that burning of carbon fossil fuels would cause more harm to the environment. Then why am I using this mic, which is using electricity, which is burning more fossil fuel? And there's this light, we should just off everything. Don't even take the camera. But why do we do that? So that idea of the even balance between empirical data and actually stuff we actually need to do. So where do we draw that balance? So I think these are the questions that I'm asking myself, and I would throw to the panel to not answer. Thank you.
Thank you all for giving your comments. Tat, you have one last comment?
No, the time I've deferred it to you, so we'll cut short my session. That's okay. But some of these questions can return after the break. And Sham, you want to say something about the break?
Yes, we're going to cut it a little shorter in the interest of time and to allow the next panel to have the full allotment of time. May I please ask that you come back in 15 minutes? Focus pretty much on differences. This time around, it's going to be discussing similarities, solutions. We're also going to take more questions from you. So if you do have your questions ready, the microphones will be ready as well. Now, on this panel, we're going to meet Paul Singh Gill. There he is. Come on up. In the left-hand corner. Paul is a veteran corporate turnaround specialist and he's a staunch humanist at heart. He was born into a Sikh family and he appreciates the diversity of faith, and though already present in Singapore, he believes that humanism can be the proverbial glue that binds. So that's Paul Singh Gill. Our next panel is Mary Rose Guatsi. She's a former Deputy Director, Corporate Communications of Singapore EDB. MA in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations. She was also in the Hartford Seminary, USA, a Christian bridge builder, interfaith dialogue advocate. Now, she hosted the first interfaith visit by the Interreligious Coordinating Council of Israel to Singapore, together with IRO Singapore. Now, she's a creator of safe spaces for conversation and also developed a 6-weekend course to build capacity for interfaith dialogue and engagement with Harmony Center. Our next panelist, Pra Go Chun Kiang, is a Singaporean Buddhist monk who received the higher ordination into the Thai Dhammayut tradition at Santi Forest Monastery in Johor, Malaysia in 2008. Now, he is trained at various forest monasteries in Malaysia and Thailand from 2008 to 2012. Now, Prago is the religious advisor for the Buddhist Youth Network and the Singapore Polytechnic Buddhist Society. He is also a member of IRO Youth to promote harmony and understanding among various faith groups. Our moderator for the second panel, Tan Tat Si, is the current president of the Singapore Humanist Society. He was schooled in science, graduated in 1986 as an electrical engineer. He worked in the corporate world for 26 years before starting as an entrepreneur in multimedia, dabbling in arts and volunteering in humanism. He lived in Canada for 5 years, China for 2 years, cast and crew in 2 movies, edited 2 NAC-sponsored books, co-authored last year's advocacy book, The Art of Advocacy, and the father of 2 university-bound sons, scientists, artists, humanists, Tan Tat Si. Hey, I didn't write this, okay? He did. All right, our next panelist, Sunita. Dr. Sunita Rai has a keen interest in fusing modern psychology and psychotherapy into the teachings of Hinduism. She is schooled in the Vedantic tradition of the Upanishads. She trains and lectures at institutes of higher learning, providing consultancy services, conducting corporate workshops, providing psychotherapy and well-being coaching. And she's a highly versatile facilitator, coach, and psychotherapist, holding a Doctor of Psychology and Master of Social Science. And last but not least, the panelists, who has joined us on all the previous interfaith events. Once again, a very gracious welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Muhammad Imran Muhammad Taib is an interfaith advocate and founding member of Left Right Center, a dialogue initiative for young professionals. He writes on multicultural issues and religion in society. He's been published in several newspapers and on online sites. Now, he co-edited a recently launched book, Budi Kritik, a compilation of 22 essays on Malay society. Thank you very much once again to the panelists. We hope you have a great afternoon. Take it away, Tat.
Well, thanks, Sham. Wow. What can I say? We have Catherine Lim, who is Catherine Lim. And we never expected what she was going to say. And that's one of the things. In fact, none of the panels and none of the speakers that we have this evening or this afternoon, we knew what they were going to say. And I think that's a good thing because it is what they really want to say. And we can also tell from Dr. Matia Lee's session that initially it was a slightly slower, everybody kind of into themselves and attacking themselves, kind of hard to attack them kind of mode. But then we drew them out, and I think the questions were really good. So because of that, we're not going to launch into this similarities thing until we maybe hear more questions out from the previous session. I know that there are a lot of questions still from the previous sessions. We'll try to flush them out, and then we'll see if this panel can answer it a different way. Let's put it that way. Questions? Yes?
Yeah, hello. I would prefer to be kept anonymous. So it's not really a question, just about comment, right? Regarding imposition, there is, particularly with halal food, right? Because there is another way it could be imposed on other people is via a market mechanism. If you have like 20% of your population is Muslim, then it's cheaper for restaurants or supermarkets to just hire halal butcher rather than hire non-halal butcher. So the end result is most restaurants would serve halal food anyway. So that's another way. So imposition is not just via authoritarian mechanism. It could also be via market forces. So even if your population is only 10% Muslim, 20% Muslim, slowly you will get halal food anyway. So that's another point. The other point I want to talk about imposition is, I think it's actually context dependent. There is actually situations where you want to impose values on other people. Christine Lim mentioned about Spanish conquistador and how bad they were doing it to the native people there. But the conquistador actually destroyed societies that practice human sacrifice. So Catholic religion is certainly better than societies that practice human sacrifice, in my opinion. I'm not even Catholic. But yeah, I think there are contexts in which imposition is actually better. So yeah, those are 2 points I want to bring up regarding imposition. So thank you.
Okay, good, thanks. We can comment on those if we need to, okay, but it's mostly comments, yeah? Okay, good, next ones?
Yeah, there were no comments regarding the Hinduism, so I wanted to tell in a different perspective. Yeah, so I'm from India, and my name is Chitra Bhanu, and I was born a Hindu, and in a Hindu family, and I was kind of a spiritualist, and then I turned rationalist, and I'm an atheist. So the one thing about Hinduism, which the rationalist societies of West and or other places, they generally don't address, is that so people will think that this is not an organized religion. True, it's not an organized religion. Hinduism is not an organized religion, though recently they are trying to make it more militant and organized through power. But the power structure in Hinduism is different. And the Hindu society is one of the most undemocratic societies, I will say, because it has something called casteism. So the justice is different for different castes. If you are a Brahmin, you are allowed to go anywhere. You are allowed to read. You are allowed to have anything. And obviously, you have bound to some rules. But if you are not from a Brahmin and you are from a lower caste, not like even 50 years ago, if the so-called Vedas, which advocates the humanity and universal brotherhood, the Vedas are not allowed to heard by the people from the lower caste. And if they hear the word Vedas by some chance, and by rule, you can pour melted metal on his or her ears. So this was practiced. And again, even nowadays, the lower caste, kids from the lower caste people in the villages, if they access common well for water, they are beaten up. And it's, don't say that this is not fundamental, and because even people were killed because people eat beef. Because of eating beef, it's like pork in the other way around. If you eat beef, you are getting killed. It happened in the last 5 years, it happened many times. More than 20 or 30 people were killed, accusing, not even, they might have not eaten beef, accusing that they are consuming beef. So it's easy to see that it's plural and all because you are seeing only one version, possibly the upper caste version of Hinduism. But the deep-rooted caste is one of the biggest issue that happening in India. It was there for 2,000 years. So unless you address that, you cannot normalize Hinduism as better than any other religions. That's all.
Good, thank you. Also mostly a comment, but we can also comment on that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Falik, and I'm working with a non-profit organization. So I identify myself as an atheist, Malay, and also as well, the most controversial would be as being gay myself. So my particular questions to the floor would be like this. I understand that certain religions would particularly would not be, let's say, how do the religions across the world, especially Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Catholicism, as well as they mentioned Hinduism, react to youths who may identify as queer? That means it includes the LGBTQ, who may have some sort of like faith. For example, they might identify as a Muslim or as a Christian. So, but the thing is that for youth, the interpretations may differ from the adults, from their parents. So how does the major religions react to this? Is there some sort of like reconciliation, or just because I can have a feeling that there are certain religion that accepts homosexuality or being queer, but they do not encourage that. That sounds a very different meaning and across the public. So that's my question to the floor. Thank you.
Good, clear question.
Yeah, I just would like to say that I think the fundamental issue here is a philosophical question. Is that because we are thinking that because faith, right? The issue of faith, right, is that when you do not know, because there's a lot of things we do not know, and everybody agrees on that. There's a lot of information we do not know. There's a lot of questions about the universe, about life that a lot of people do not know. But when you say faith, right, is that you are making a claim on something that you do not have the answers, but you're making a claim on it. So I think that's more of a philosophical issue. Like, if you do not know the answer, do you make up stories about it? Do you make up myths about it? So I think that's a philosophical angle. So the questions, I don't believe that we should throw religion into the trash can or whatever. But the thing now is that can we build morality? Because it's important. Can we build a morality from facts? Like how would the humanists do this? How do they build their moralities from things that they do know? Yeah, so that's my comment and questions.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm an undergraduate at NUS, and I major in political science. So my question will be very specific to Singapore, since we're talking about interbelief in Singapore society. So I want to talk about the governance or the regulation, the state governance or regulation of religion in Singapore. Well, rhetorically, we say that we are a secular society, but not all religions are treated equally by our political system. Some religions are regulated more than others. I mean, a very prominent example would be the Muslim faith, Islam, right? We have a minister in charge of Muslim affairs. We do not have a minister in charge of other religions in Singapore. And MUIS, the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, actually reports to the minister. So based on this whole hierarchy structure of the governance of Islam in Singapore, a political appointee is actually higher than the mufti in Singapore. So I would like the panel to comment on this aspect, and also how much of our geopolitical reality, because Singapore has been said as being a little red dot in a sea of Islamic green, right? And how whether Islam is being seen as a security threat, maybe not explicitly, but undertone, because if you talk about how Malay Muslims enlistees get sort of allocated to less sensitive vocations in the armed forces during the national service. So let's get some comment from the panelists on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to allow two more because two people are standing there, and I think there are quite a lot of issues here, but I'll remind the panel what we might have missed. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bernard. Just on, since we're all here, I guess we should test a few assumptions that we have had. For example, I think the issue is that we should confront today is whether, are we imposing our own judgments of good and bad onto this supernatural, supreme deity in the sky, for example. So, for example, we all know for a fact that, maybe the Hindu gods may be, the Hinduism itself supports casteism. Christianity is not for homosexuality. Maybe Christianity and Islam are for the killing of non-believers, right? We might think that's bad. But does the God in the sky think that's bad? Maybe he doesn't think so. Maybe he wants non-believers to be killed. Maybe he wants casteism to exist on this planet. And in a sense, in a capitalist society that we live in, there's already casteism. There's the upper crust, wealthy people in the society, there's the middle class, and there's the lower classes in society as well. In a sense, there's casteism as well. It's God giving us a sign that in Hinduism that, casteism should exist. Thank you. Just a question.
Thanks, Bernard.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes, David, we can hear you. I know David.
My name is David, and I have a question, which is, does the panel believe that human beings have a primary identity? And further, is a religious belief part of a primary identity? And if so, does it affect human relationships either positively or negatively?
David, let me clarify this. Did everybody hear that? Is human a primary identity?
Yeah.
And how it affects the relationships?
Yes, yes.
All right, so we got that. Good. Anyone to begin first? My mic can also be with anyone. Any question would do. Sure.
Is human being the primary identity? Okay, from a Christian Catholic perspective, okay, because I was baptized a Methodist, but I confirmed as a Catholic a few years ago. But I was an atheist for 33 years. So I'm on some kind of journey, all right? I think that when God created the earth, okay, in the Bible, according to our text, okay, this is from our text that we look at in Genesis, was that he breathed his breath into Adam. And so when we look at it, is that everyone has the Spirit of God. And God sees all of us as good. But people with our own lenses, all right, with our own traumas and with our wounded personalities, we do not see things the way that God sees. And for me as a Catholic, or as a follower of Jesus, is to try to be more aligned to seeing people with the Spirit of God in them. With Jesus, in my case, it would be to see Jesus, to see Christ in them, and treat them the way that, with love, that God would treat them. So love your neighbor as yourself, and do good to others, and don't curse them even though you're enemy. So the first identity is they are created, for me, is we are created human beings, all right? And Christianity, for example, Jesus came was actually to bring us back home to him. But the way we bring is different. I think God allows a lot of diversity. All right, and we are saying that in some of our faiths and within the traditions that I've gone through, that there is only one identity. But I think when I spent my time in Israel, West Bank, and the Gaza Strip in 2001, I saw the poverty in the religious. Why would three Abrahamic faiths, supposedly worshiping the same God, but not able to make peace, not able to share a small, tiny piece of land? And then I look at Singapore, and we say, like, we're very religiously diverse, but we can share a piece of land, and this land is so small. It's a matter of choice. And it's a human choice. And God gave us free will. So whether we make peace or not is actually up to our choice, because he sees what he has created as good. But how do I see myself? Shamima, are you here? Can I get the slide? Okay. I have a slide it's from Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition. It's about the elephant. Yes. So from my perspective is that we are all our perceptions shade us from seeing what the reality is. All right? And these are blind men, and so if they're holding the elephant's trunk, they would say the elephant is like a snake. And if you're holding the elephant's stump, the foot, you would think that it's a tree stump. And if you're holding the tail, you say it's a rope. And the ear would be a sheath of leather. And so I treasure these conversations because you help me see a larger perspective of humanity. All right? And I can say from my own journey, okay, from being an atheist to a baptized Methodist to being confirmed as a Catholic, and I spent several years studying Islam, and I stayed with Muslim women on campus at Hartford Seminary, that the engagement in this way, not saying he's blind, but come and see from my side, come and feel what I feel, come and see and experience. And this is what Houston Smith talks about. When we go deep to listen to the other, listen to them deeply about their experience, how they experience no God, how they experience God, and their reality, we come down to a point where he calls it is the water table of common humanity. And in that space, we're not talking about our divides. We're trying to build the bridges. We're trying to connect your experience for mine. Whatever it is, even humanists, we have an experience. And I really thank you for this session where you all have been open, because I have my own veils. And in this way, if we were together to talk about it, to bring the other and say, come, see and feel, we would see something more. The other thing is that when we look at the human psyche, all right, conscious and unconscious, it's like an iceberg, all right? The tip of the iceberg is at the top. We have no comprehension at the moment what is below. Below, psychologists would say, would be all our hurts, our wounds, our traumas, and our experiences. And in this place, for us, for me, is where the religious experience is helping us to deal and heal. Everyone is on a journey. When you see me as a Catholic, I am not a perfect Catholic. I may say, I am a Catholic, and this is the creed, and this is what I should do. I should love the Lord, my God, with all my heart, with all my strength. I should love my neighbor as myself, and I love my enemy, and I'll pray for him, and I'll ask for forgiveness. But I'm sorry, I'm not fully practicing it. And so when we compare text and religion and people, we have to see that we're all on the journey, and we're trying. And like Somebody had this conversation, somebody's walking this way and somebody's walking that way. That's part of the journey. When I do things on the outside, it's an outer journey, but something is happening inside to me. I have to reflect. It's not about once saved, always saved. What I've learned from Christians, Saint Ignatius spirituality is that God said he created everything and everything is good. But now I have to look at myself and see what is the baggage that's affecting how I see God. All right? Sorry. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to elaborate that a little bit and see if I can draw more out of this. We know a lot of the religious premise. I think people come from different religious backgrounds. And in this particular case, I think I would just, for the interest of a discussion, so it's not an elephant, let's say. It's Mr. Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. People familiar with that? Yes. Yeah, Mr. Snuffleupagus, if I pronounce that correctly. So you could still be naming the wrong God concept, okay? So now the issue might be one of, these people are pointing to different parts of the body, but in this case, claiming it to be all they know, okay? And I can already relate this, and I'll move to the Hinduism side, because you got two questions there. Is that I think George Bernard Shaw said something about the multitudes of gods, and I think it's probably the only religion where a Methodist and a idolatry worshiper can still claim to be something that is quite acceptable to them. And at the same time, we have people saying that, what about the caste system and things like that? So I think the relationship between the people is what I want to explore with David's question. Yeah.
Okay, I think I lost you a little bit, so bear with me as I try and make sense out of it. So I guess maybe if we understood how Hinduism looked at the whole concept of the universe, that might make some sense. So do ask me more questions if this doesn't kind of answer what you were asking earlier. So for Hindus, the concept of the universe and God and people and everything that you're experiencing is basically a manifestation of God. So is the human and identity, you could put it as that if you want to, but everything is just a being. So if you looked at the whole universe as a manifestation of God, then there is not so much separations that you're looking at. Rather, you're just seeing everything as coexisting. If you want to take on the human as an identity by itself, you can if you want to. So that's a choice for you already. So there is no real separation from everything that you're experiencing. So for a Hindu, whether you are of different faith, same faith, or you are a humanist or anything you want to call yourself, makes no difference. So every Hindu automatically becomes a humanist in that sense. Because out of 20 rules that we follow, the first 10 rules is about being a good human being. If you don't know how to be a good human being, don't even think about being a Hindu. Case closed. Simple as that.
Okay. Caste system, yes.
Okay, so do I take beef and caste system together, or?
Others can take it too.
Okay, so if you want to eat beef, enjoy life, continue, there's no issue around that. If you look at the Vedic times when Hinduism was first starting off and stuff, so like Shiva was saying 7,000 years ago, and so when whatever there's, for example, the monks, for example, whatever that's given to them, whether you give them meat, beef, whatever, they have to eat that. And whatever is taken as whatever you're giving me, I'm taking. So it's not that you cannot eat beef per se, but we respect the cow a lot. Out of respect, most Hindus don't take beef. So does that mean there's an injunction that you can't? Not really. So you have to make sense out of it, you have to read. Now the challenge with this is a lot of Hindus don't read. A lot of Hindus are not educating themselves. And they're going by a lot of superstitions, by traditions, by parents' teachings, and not taking the effort to read and understand. Now, if you read and understand, a lot of these questions won't come out. You would understand why you're doing this. When I grew up, in my earlier years, I was embarrassed to be a Hindu. When my mom got to the temple, I said, why is she wasting time? When she rang the bell, I'm like, oh my God, 6+ and you're waking me up kind of thing. So I hated it. I think I only kind of embraced Hinduism about so that you don't know my age too much, maybe about 20 years ago. So just roughly around that. So, and how did that happen was only because I started reading. I went to a center that started teaching and I started questioning a lot. The good thing about Hinduism is you're allowed to question every single thing, including who is God, why doesn't he even exist, is it even true, are you bullshitting me? So all these things you're allowed to question to the core. So that kind of got me questioning a lot of these things. So I'm going to go into the caste system now. Do we really have the caste system? What do you think? Come on, my dear friends. And no need to give politically correct answer. Do we really have a caste system? Yes, we do. And do I have issues with the caste system? Not really. So if we understand how India was moving in the earlier years, that would make some sense to us. So do you know how war takes place? Are you familiar? Okay, so in the past, if you look at India, it was a highly rich country. People were well taken care of, and even I'll just include homosexuality into that. People who are homosexuals was not an issue. The king's job is to take care of them. So everyone was very accepted. The country was rich, people were happy. How happy is questionable, okay, so we don't get into that. But people were generally well taken care of, contented and stuff like that. Now, why was that? There was a certain system in place. And what do you call this system? Later in years, people call it caste system. You can call it anything you want. It's basically just a system. So each person does their job, so to speak. Each person takes care of their role. So if I'm a teacher, my job is to make sure that I understand what teaching is and teach to the best of my ability. If my role is to clean this room, I'll do it to the best of my ability. Now, is one better than the other? Not really. Each person had an interdependence to one another. So, for example, people who are merchants and all, their job was to basically take care of society. The people who are so-called the teachers, the Brahmins, their job was to make sure you always teach. If you don't teach, don't call yourself a Brahmin, case closed. So basically, everybody had a role to play. So is it a major issue for Hindus in this caste system? Not really. So why did the war topic come in? So you know India has been, a lot of people have invaded and stuff, right? That one you Google it, a very fast one. I'll Google friend take care of everything. So there are 4 ways where you negotiate things. And this came from one of our Shastras. So the first one is you basically form alliances, right? So you actually kind of win over people. If that doesn't work, you do step 2, which is you give them gifts. You can call it bribery if you want to. Step 3 is basically, I think it was Bheda. Bheda is basically divide and rule. So how did the caste system become an issue? Divide and rule. That's how it came up. Now the 4th one is take over by force. So where did this caste system become an issue in India was basically at step 3, divide and rule. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
Okay, so it's one of those answers where I think Seneca said that religion to the rulers is useful. Yeah.
It is.
Okay, it's useful. Okay, there are other questions. Brian's question on certain religions that get special treatments and certain ones that don't. Who wants to take that? Imran? You're not looking at me, Imran. Say whatever you can.
Before I address that, I think I just want to deal at the more philosophical level. I think there was a question of belief. For me, I think belief stems from the deepest experience of the human being. Yeah? And that's probably separate from identity. For me, identities are always constructed, and identities are always underpinned by power and also by dominant groups in society to define what a particular term means. Now, a case in point is the term humanism. Again, I don't like dichotomies, neat black and white dichotomies as though religion and humanism are two separate entities, or religion and science are really irreconcilable and they're two really opposing ends. Because we must not forget that in history, the emergence of humanism has religious underpinnings. One of the earliest expression and emergence of humanism was the Italian Renaissance. And the key figure in the Italian Renaissance was Pico della Mirandola, who, in his famous oration on the dignity of man, mentioned that I found it in the books of the Saracens, meaning the Muslims, that nothing is more glorious in the creation of God than man himself. So the inspiration of the Italian Renaissance that actually led to the flourishing of humanism in Europe and later on develops into the Enlightenment period and all, has a lot of these inspirations from Islamic humanism that was thriving in the 9th and 10th century. You know how that was a period where science and a lot of discoveries were made. And we must not forget that, because sometimes when we talk about the current issues that we are dealing with, a lot of it has got to do with the experience, the crucial experience that Europe went through with the church. And that has created a lot of resentment. Now, having said that, of course, I will identify myself as a humanist, as a theist Muslim humanist, in the sense that I put man or the human being at the center. But of course, being a theist and being a believer, that man in the center or human being in the center also holds the inspiration from my faith and also belief in God. Yeah, so that's how Islamic humanism has always expressed itself throughout history. And that relates to the whole issue of the dignity of man, or whether man is the bottom line in terms of how we look at each other, yeah? And this is how traditional Islamic wisdom has also looked at it. There is always this very famous example cited by the former chairman of the biggest Muslim organization in the world, the Nahdlatul Ulama in Indonesia. He was also the 4th president of Indonesia, Abdul Rahman Wahid, or Gus Dur. He always mentioned that there are 3 kinds of solidarity. First is solidarity amongst Muslims, Ukhuwah Islamiyah. Second is the solidarity amongst your nation folks, people, Ukhuwah Wataniyah, yeah? People of the same land or maybe citizens or nationality. And the third is Ukhuwah Bashariyah, the solidarity with a fellow human. The problem when people inverted it and said the solidarity with fellow Muslims is first and foremost the most important. And he said no. At least through the Islamic teachings and the wisdom of the Islamic scholarships of the past, there's always been solidarity with the humanity that comes first. And that's how Muslim humanists throughout history has always viewed it, and we need to reclaim that. Now, that's my first point. My second point is that I think we need to also question what do we understand by the term religion itself. I've always, scholars have debated like what are the features of religion that we can call it religion, right? Even atheists also can't agree on this. Yeah, I've read a very fascinating book by the constitutional expert of the America, Ronald Dawkins, yeah, not Richard Dawkins, who wrote Religion Without God. It's a very fascinating book of how it tries to reconceptualize and find a middle point between the same human expressions and need between whether you have a belief in God or don't have a belief in God. For me, I would take the most broadest definition from this Erich Fromm, who's a psychoanalyst, German psychoanalyst, and humanist thinker himself, who says that religion is when you have an object of worship, or rather something that you really focus on, and your whole life is oriented towards that object. So you can be a Muslim, claiming yourself to assume the Muslim identity, but in your everyday life, you revolve around money. So that's your religion. Even though as an identity, you say you're Muslim, right? And people can have different objects where they actually focus their life on and they orientate their life towards that. That is their religion. And that's how many Muslims fall into that same trap, when they say, oh, this as a Muslim, I'm better than the other, but in actual lived reality, they are far away from it. And now since we are in the World Cup period, I see many expressions of this where, on TV when you see just before they take a penalty kick, they will mutter a few things. And then you see on screen some of the supporters doing this. They are actually bringing God into their football side, right? Now, this is what the South African thinker Farid Izzat called, we have colonized God. Whereas in religion, we are supposed to fashion ourselves after God, right? But now what is happening is we are fashioning God after ourselves. And that's the root of the problem, I think, where our religiosity is actually a worship of our own ego, of our own mind and all that. And at least from the Muslim standpoint, that is the greatest sin. It's shirk, yeah? When you associate something with God, and when you associate your own opinion, you associate yourself, your own thinking, and you absolutize it, that is basically a no-no. And when you go into the term like Allahu Akbar, you know, right? So when you score a goal and Allahu Akbar, you know, you have colonized God again, you know, as if God helps you to score that goal. We forget that Allahu Akbar doesn't mean God is the greatest. It actually means God is greater. So it's God is greater than anything else, even yourself, even your own opinions, and therefore there must be a strong level of humility in the believers to actually question whether they are really worshipping their own self and fashioning God after their own needs, including when you want halal Subway, right? Is it really because of Islam or anything else? But is it because your own desire and lust to eat thing that you feel unhappy because someone else is able to eat it and you can't? Right? So a lot of it has got to do with this. And we need to understand religion is not monolithic. It expressed in different ways, and there's a lot of diversity in it. Okay, so that's my point. Now, can I just address that state more specific to that, yeah? Now, I remember this story, you know, since someone was mentioning the Reconquista, you know, that's how ancient societies operate, right? Where religion and the state are actually quite fused. Yeah? So in Andalusia, in the Iberian Peninsula, or now we call it Spain, the Christian Visigoths were there. Muslims came, took over, and then the Muslims imposed Muslim rule. And then the Reconquista happened, and then they kicked out the Muslim, right? They kicked out the Jews first, yeah? And the Jews suffered a lot before the Muslims were eventually expelled also. So there was this Christian and a Muslim on the boat, and the Christian was supposed to accompany the Muslim out to the sea, yeah, to the North Africa, to Morocco, you know, to be expelled. So along the way, the boat capsized. And only these two buggers survived, yeah? The Muslim and the Christian. And then they survived, and then they came to an uninhabited land. And then said, okay, now there's only two of us, you're Christian or Muslim. Back then, Muslims used to rule the place, and then after that, the Christians reconquered, and then you rule. Now both of us are here, we need to work together, right? Somehow the Muslims are good at climbing up the tree and plucking the nut, but the Christian is good at doing some other things. So they need to work together, and then they have to make some kind of political arrangement. No way that I'm going to say the Christian is going to rule this island and then I submit to him, neither will the Muslims say that. So eventually they settled what we have to separate our beliefs from the way we are going to live and survive. That's the only way we can survive. Actually, that's exactly the experience of Europe after the wars and led to the Westphalia Treaty, right? And that's how political secularism actually develops. When, you know, eventually we have to acknowledge you can never reconcile people's beliefs, but we have this land that we have to live and work together and cooperate and ensure peace. And the only way is to keep your religious beliefs separate from imposition to everyone else through state mechanism and coercion. And that's basically how these two survivors have worked it out, yeah? And then said, okay, then fine, you go and build, okay, so the way we govern the land is through mutual cooperation. So you go and build your own church, and then I'm going to build my own mosque. Well, because religion is deeply important to them, even though no congregation, it's okay, they're still going to worship God, right? So the Christian, well, after a while, the Christian come and visit the Muslim and say, okay, let me see your mosque. I want to visit, since let's do interfaith work lah. So they went, so the Muslims saw, okay, so this is where I worship. And then there's also another mosque there. And the Christian was surprised. Said, there's only one of you. Oh, that's the mosque that I don't go to. This is my mosque. You see, beliefs will always be diverse and people will be divided because it's deeply personal to your own experience. Yeah? But the way we live together in this land has to be managed in neutral terms and without bringing your personal belief to impose on the other. Of course, you can have your personal beliefs to inform and be participant of the public discourse on certain policy issues to give inputs from your religious perspective, that's fine. Yeah, but when it comes to decision-making process, it has to be in the best interest and in a discursive, rational way. And we see how we can learn to live together in that sense without having to discuss or debate theologically. Thank you.
You want to answer that? Very good, thanks. We want to answer that, the other questions. I want to move on to maybe the LGBT side and see if we have answers from the other side.
I'll answer the LGBT and followed by maybe affirm Dr. Sunita's on the caste system. For LGBT, in the Indian context, many pre-Buddhist religions, they acknowledge there are other genders. There are many other genders aside from male and female. So it's like accepted even in the infamous Kama Sutra. It's not all about sex position. It's also got talk about different gender. I heard this from an EIF session. One of the speakers mentioned. So I went back, check my Buddhist monastic code. There's a criteria for monastics to ordain. See, so let's say if a monk wants to ordain, he has to be a straight male. So I look up what are the other genders involved. So I also got so many, There's one very weird one. See, there's a gender that can change in full moon. During full moon, it can change, Oh, that is also another gender. So got so many classifications. So they acknowledge this kind of thing. So religion is one thing. And then what is important when you talk about individual or family level or even communal level is the cultural aspect. Some people want to pass down the generation, pass down the bloodline. So they insist, okay, you must give me a son, you must give me a daughter. So you must see which one clash, which one they prioritize more. So if they are more religious, then maybe they can accept, you see. If they are more into carry on the religion, carry on the family bloodline, then I think they are not so happy with this the LGBT thing. So it's a case-by-case basis again. So for Buddhism, it's only more restrictive to monastics, but for layperson, there's not much restriction. The only restriction is the law of the country only. But for Buddhist teaching, not much restriction, except don't be unfaithful to your partner. And to affirm Dr. Sunita's the caste system thing, I'll give a Buddhist perspective. Because like monks, not just Buddhist monks, even maybe Jain monks, or even some Hindu monks, they belong to the Shramana tradition. That means they are off the grid. They don't want to be part of the caste system. They don't want to be the Brahmin caste, don't want to be part of the warrior caste, don't want to be part of the merchant caste, don't want to be the outcast. So they are, don't want to play the game. So they hide in forests, go to the cave. So they are the Shramana tradition. So these people, how to get their food if they hide in the forest? So some of them, they have the practice of going for alms round. So they go to the village. So for monastics, we have, aside from 3 kinds of meat we cannot eat, that we cannot see the meat being killed for us. Cannot see the meat, we cannot hear the meat being killed for us. That means when we go for alms round, we cannot hear the chicken being slaughtered for us, you see? Or we cannot suspect the meat purposely killed for us. That means it's already prepared for the family and they just give a fraction of the food to us, that's all. So we don't be part of the sort of killing process. That means we are out of the system, you see? So we just go and take whatever we have, then we just go. So then there are also 10 kind of forbidden meats. 10 kind of forbidden meats. So somehow beef is not included. Beef is not included. Royal elephant is included, forbidden meat. Tiger, alligator, snake, human, dog. But I see no beef. So somehow that's the thing in Buddhism. So how to solve the problem? Somehow this caste system is not a problem, but organized caste system might be a problem. Once it's organized, then there will be discrimination, income inequality, or maybe unhappiness. So when Buddhism was founded, that was the era when there's a lot of this unhappiness. So at that time in India, there were like 7 kingdoms recorded in our scripture. So the 7 kingdoms, the 7 kings were like exploring, which new religion to take up to appease the people. The last thing they want is the people to revolt against them, you see. So then they will lose the throne. So they must find another religion quickly. They must adopt another religion quickly. So our account was that our Buddha, when he started his career as a monk, he just shaved his head down the road and tried practicing asceticism. He haven't even found a teacher yet. Then this King Bimbisara headhunted him already. You're warrior caste Kakinang. Okay, you want to be my religious advisor? No? You be my religious advisor. You can own this whole piece of land. It's yours. And our Buddha at that time was like, no, wait, I haven't found the truth yet. Let me go and practice what's called debate. Then I come back later and see how. Yeah, so that was the time in the Buddha's time. Yeah, so after the Buddha passed away, he didn't take sides in any king. So what happened was, after he was cremated, 7 kingdoms were almost fighting over his relics. Yeah, they want to sort of own the religion. Not just Buddhism, you check the Jain scriptures, also the same thing. The same kings who patronize Buddhism also patronize their exploring. Yeah? So, but the first king that successfully sort of institutionalized Buddhism was King Asoka. Yeah? After you conquered a big piece of territory, and so how to make the people happy? Okay, you need to find a religion. Okay, Buddhism. So he found Buddhism. So that was the first king to sort of institutionalize the religion. But next thing, the caste system reorganized again, and it came back to India. Yeah, but of course, different place will give a different terminology. Let's say you go to some other countries, they call middle class, middle working class, or maybe called blue collar, whatever collar. So different place will give different terminologies. In our scriptures, even worse. The Buddha mentioned 91 eons ago, there's already caste system. Different universe cycle also have caste system. So it's a universal thing. It's part of society. It's how the society works. Yeah.
Okay. Paul, anything to add?
Right, hold on. Now I've got to justify my presence here, right? Why am I up here? People are wondering what is he going to contribute? So just very quickly, this is not going to take long. The other advantage is if you are, I'm the last, I suppose, on the panel here, and then we've got the advantage of having the panel before, so this is good. I've written a few things down. So, Paul Singhil. I am born and raised here in Singapore, Singaporean, raised as a Sikh. So, and folks that do perhaps know Sikhism or about Sikhism, I'll just explain very quickly what it is. So it's one of the younger of the world's major religions, I imagine. It's about 500 years old on average, depending on who you ask. And so it is monotheistic, so it believes, if you will, or adherents to the religion believe in one God, right, an entity. So, let's make some notes. So one of the things that it did reject, I suppose, because it had the advantage of seeing what had happened or learning about other older religions, organized religions, such as Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. 3 things that it strived or has strived to do is, one, of course, is this thing that we've been talking about today, the caste system. So it has completely, in its tenets, rejected the possibility or even the idea that people are different, right, based on professions, based on their lot in life or their station, wherever they find themselves. Secondly is the worship of deities, if you will. Anything which is in a clay form, wooden form, a picture, something or other, that's not followed, right, in the religion. And the other one is animal sacrifice. So real or true adherents to Sikhism are vegetarian, right? So they don't, and it's the belief about not wanting to make animals suffer. But the interesting thing, in addition to that, is it has also rejected the practice of what is that when you kill an animal but you read something. I know the Muslims do it, and I know the Jews do it, right? They have that ritual sacrifice type thing, and you read that. So Sikhism says, why do you if you want to cut, if you want to kill it, chop. That's how my mother used to do it. She'd bring chickens at home and boom, right? One shot. And you don't slaughter that way because we don't know, or it says we don't know, that there is a presence of God around the animal's throat, etc. So so they rejected that. So that being said, so over the years I have thought about my place in Sikhism, for example, and realized that who I am inside, perhaps in terms of what I believe, may not be what I am seeing outside or being seen from the exterior. Because Sikhism does ask you to look in a certain way, Right? So I had the turban and I had the beard, the whole lot. Oh, like one of those people over there in front of the elephants. But a younger version, right? Not with the white beards just yet. And that, so I took those out about 20 years ago now, again, showing my age or not showing my age. And I have decided that, okay, so now there's a bit more of an equality in terms of who I am, in terms of what I believe inside, versus perhaps how I look outside. So I had a full head of hair, now that's gone also, or it's on its way of going. And so that's that. So I then I looked up on the net and I'm thinking, who are these people? The Humanist Society, right? So what else is there out there here so many years ago? So I've been a member about 4 years, almost 5 years now. And any society or any group of people that want to promote the flourishing of a human being, I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's a good thing. Right? And I thought, all right, I'll sign up now. So here we go, card-carrying member, badge-wearing member. And I love the tenets of the society in terms of what it's out to do, right? And flourishing of a human being, perfect, you've got me. So one other thing I wanted to add was, for me, religion is a prism. It's a piece. It's this thing. It's a set of glasses. So some folks need the glasses to be able to see the world a little bit clearer. I have absolutely no quarrel with that. Right? For me, what I have decided to do is take off those glasses, those proverbial glasses, and if I am lost, if things are unclear, then it's upon me to find that clarity. So I have my conscience as my guide. I go to sleep every night thinking, well, what I've done today, good or bad, can I reflect on that? But I'm not going to have something as a crutch to get me to carry on. So that's that. Thank you.
Good. So thanks. Paul. Yeah. So the humanist is now not out there to destroy religion.
Well, no. Well, that's the thing. So anything that aids in human flourishing, we support. So personally, if you do have a religion, as I said, or whatever your beliefs are, so long as it helps you make it clearer, your life clearer, I have no quarrels. It's okay. So long as, and we talked about the imposition now of one belief onto another, or one person onto another, etc. That I have a bit of a problem with, because I think people need to stumble their way through and find themselves, whether it is onto an organized religion or a belief of any sort, or otherwise. And that should be all right. And I think that's part of why I am excited here, the odd one out, trying to find my place on this dais, is this whole interbelief activity that we've got this afternoon. And I'm happy for it that we're here.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I'm getting an underlying message, and I know that we're out of time because we need to get clear out of this place by 5 p.m. Is this? It sounds that we talk about humanism. Catherine came out here, and I said to myself after hearing her, "Wow, I'm in a new religion now." Yeah, humanism, the religion. Religion number 3 for her, but religion number 1 for me. But I guess it's something that I sometimes jokingly also say, since we wear the same badge, is that, and as the PJ had so aptly said, that there is 1,001 humanism. And that I like to jokingly say that, hey, I believe in a personal humanism. Like I believe in a personal God for people with religion. And I think that's where the diversity comes in. But one way or another, I think the human part, if I can summarize for all, is that the human part is so very important. Because Sunita, you said that if no education, people think otherwise. And they tend to take the easy way out. And all these, if the human part is not very strong, I think the religious part can really go off. Do you agree with that? The human part is somewhat not well educated, doesn't have a very strong education, that the religious part that might be off a little. Sure.
let's look at the Singapore context, all right? We may not accept having missionaries come, but the Catholic and the Christian missionaries came to come and establish schools. We may not agree with the values, but I think they had a good education system. Of course, I had cousins who had different experiences in a certain school where there were sisters who made her kneel on the floor in cobblestones to repeat the Bible verse. So there's both the good and the bad coming in. But overall, I think Christianity, in its sense, formed a base for the development of education, because it does believe it in education. The other thing I want to add is that in your pictures about humanists, all right, some of them were of people of other religions. Because some of people call themselves Christian humanists, you can Google that, or Muslim humanists. Because I asked Imran, was Omar Khayyam Muslim? All right, so when we talk about humanists, they may include people of other faiths in the past. Maybe now it's separate, but also when I Google, I can see Muslim humanists and stuff like that. And one more other thing that I needed to add was that, you know, the Singapore Council for Women, that was in the early stages of the before AWARE and everything, before we became independent, actually, the women were all religious people. And one of them was from the Baha'i faith. I can't remember her name now, but she was a power vessel, but she gathered all the women, you know, Chinese, Malay, Indian, everybody came together, and they were all religious, and they did something for the women, you know, for the Malay women, for the Indian women, and stuff like that. So I think sometimes history is important, all right? Not to negate, just look at the present, but the history, and even the history of our relationships between Christians and humanists. We've fought, I think, with the Catholic Church, all right, with Islam and everything. So we have a history that might shape the way that we view each other, shape the perception. And if you don't believe it, some people might say it's within the unconscious. So this unconscious, collective consciousness comes down to us. So there is a whole lot going on underneath that we may not understand, but Mr. Google is a wonderful information agent.
Thanks, Mary Rosa, for that.
Sorry,
so I won't generalize that, but
sorry,
I
can I just
will
clarify?
Yes,
can I just clarify? Because I was not saying education as in the standard definition of education. What I meant was a lot of times we get very distracted by how things are implemented. So I always say lead life with two eyes. Like inquire, try and find out about the intention, not just the implementation. So I was referring more to that. Try and do a lot of inquiry to understand the
Critical
intention.
thinking, yeah.
Yes, critical thinking kind of thing. Because otherwise, we always say tolerate one another, but that's not something we actually emphasize. So what should be emphasized is from tolerance, move to understanding and move to respect. Don't stay at tolerance. That's not good enough. Yeah.
Okay. So I won't generalize that except to say that the critical thinking is very, very important, and that even though we don't seem to have addressed the issue of our similarities, let me just say that humanism is also something about just have us critically thinking about dogma, not just religion, other dogmas too. Yeah, tradition, culture. So all these things I think are in the purview of whether it's the right thing to do, it's a humane thing to do, and it's under consideration for humanism as well. And having said that, that the fact that we have this opportunity here to really flush out the questions means that we're sort of trying to get to a place where we understand each other more. I know that certainly that I've learned a lot more now than I was about half an hour ago on things that I didn't know before. And I hope that that's the same with you. Unless there are any pressing comments, we're going to call this a wrap. And we hope that we'll have more of these sessions going. Any pressing comments? Yes, Chet. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chet. I'd like to just pull a couple of questions from before to now. So this wonderful session revealed that Hinduism can be the caste system all the way to charity. Buddhism is great, but you have Viratha going crazy in Burma. Islam is compassionate and it introduced a lot of science, but it also has Jamaat Islamiyah and so on. And of course, the Catholic Church, great charity all around the world, but also at the same time, the Inquisition and so on. Now, if we put this together, what causes us to fall into this kind of like slippery slope that can go from good to bad? What is that one thing that we should try to avoid? I think that ties into the panel discussion now, which is common denominator is obviously critical thinking, intellectualism, and so on. But can we caution ourselves? What do we need to do to avoid that sliding slope? And I don't know, where do we draw the line? How do we find ourselves, like the Westboro Baptist Church, for example? Right? So earlier on, the gentleman was saying how we should kick religion. Now, I think that's a bit unfair, because just as religion it's not fantastic all the time, but it's also not bad all the time. It's a scale. So maybe as a reflection, what can we do individually or as a social group to avoid sliding to the other side? I think like what Paul was saying, can we take off our glasses? It's food for thought. Thank you very much for one of your thoughts.
Yeah, from Imran.
Just since we don't have much time, so very quickly, some of the genocides, one of the most terrible genocides occurred next door in Indonesia. Some say that up to 2 million communists and communist sympathizers were actually massacred by Suharto. And Suharto was doing it not in the name of religion, but in the name of a secular ideology. Pol Pot similarly did the same thing. And there are many atrocities done not in the name of religion, but in the name of some other ideologies, including fascism and Nazism and others. Yeah? So I think at the root of the problem is not religion or not no religion. The root of the problem is the human condition, the human atrocities, and what humans can do to themselves and to others. We need to address that, and therefore the overarching theme that both people of religion and no religion should come together is on the ethical question. The ethical question, not driven by, of course, for some people, the ethical is driven from and inspired from their religious traditions. For some, it's from secular ideas or philosophies. That's fine, but we need to come together and discuss this in the most rational way on how we can live the good life and how we can have the common good for everyone. That's one. For people of religion, I would say that one, probably just to answer your question quickly, there's a very good book by Charles Kimball. The name is When Religion Becomes Evil. And he listed 5 conditions where religious institutions can actually degenerate and cause a lot of harm. Look up for that book and learn from it so that we can have a better way of religiosity and living our religious life without that. Thank you.
Short one sentence, okay? Having conversations about this, about our history, is like holding a mirror to each other to see what others see and then to examine it on your own, in your inner reflection. And that for me is one of the key things that we learn when we do it in the safe circles, so that you can actually see the pain of what you have done to the other person. And when the other person tells you exactly, and that is when your common humanity can come up.
Regardless of whichever religion, be it Buddhism or Christianity or whatever, normally, let's say a king or a government or even a terrorist leader, when they want to maintain dominance of a certain territory or even take over other people's territory, they won't tell their subject, I want to take over this land to fill my pockets with money. Nobody will fight for them. Nobody will fight for them. They will mention religious reason. Because of God, because of Buddha, whatever. So then people will willingly, fight for them. Yeah, so this is how they make use of organized religion. But if you find the religious scripture, maybe you can't find such thing. You can't find such thing. So also to answer Tats's question about the dogmas and the commonalities. So in the Buddhist perspective, we have a syllabus, a very general syllabus which is to avoid evil, do good, and purify the mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. So not just this Buddha, we also have previous Buddhas, which I may not know. It might be another religion I cannot recognize also. So this is the fundamental essentials. So avoid evil means avoid greed and hatred, body, speech, and mind, the thoughts, speech, action. Then do good is to have these thoughts of loving kindness, generosity, I have some thoughts of wisdom, things of reflection or impermanence and whatever not. So if you keep on doing that, then our mind get purer and purer, then purer and purer. So habitually we won't think of negative thoughts in future, lesser and lesser. So this is our sort of syllabus. And so if we follow this line, normally in interfaith work, we normally say doing good is the base. Then the religious doctrines may differ for different religions. But I tend to see the other way around. I will see that the doing good is the end goal. The different, the ideologies might be the different paths to reach this end goal, to do good. Yeah.
Thank you. And this is a very good panel, and the previous one as well. We're very, very willing to want to open up to each other. And I think the same, we wanted to involve the audience a lot, and I think we did. Okay, I wish we had more time for more questions from the floor, but that's mainly the focus for the second session too, and we answered those questions. And I think in future, when we get the next session, whoever organizes these sessions, we ought to take this to see how this can go to the greater part of Singapore, because it cannot be just a sponge. We've always talked about this, how we should open this up to even more people to be engaged. All right, so with that, I hope, yes?
Sorry. Just throw in a comment, not necessarily an answer. Because I just want to clarify on what it means to be living in a secular age. The idea of secular. I know that this panel is about similarities between humanists and believers, but I think that if we clarify the definition of what it means to be secular, it opens up more possibilities for engagement between these two groups. So if our idea of what secular means is to be irreligious, to be neutral, objective, unbiased, then I think we are quite losing the arguments here in this age, because there is another meaning of secular, which means where belief, any kind of belief, is contestable. It means that the idea of believing in God is not necessarily axiomatic. That's why you have a lot of humanists out there. But at the same time, the similarities I would say between humanists and believers is this: that all of us, whether we are religious believers or unbelievers, are seeking a meaning, significance, and a kind of fullness, right? But at the same time, in this secular age, it's ironic that humanists, I'm not speaking for all humanists because I'm not one, but I suspect that humanists are also experiencing a kind of longing, a kind of, quote unquote, a knocking from the transcendence. Whereas the believers, they are also experiencing a kind of challenge in the sense that they are experiencing doubt in their belief. So it is this kind of phenomenon which the philosopher Charles Taylor called cross pressure. It is a pressure from the top and a pressure from the bottom, a pressure from the transcendent divinity and a pressure from an immanent moral sense, that describes what this secular age is. So if I were to end this comment, I would say that in order for us to engage in each other in a more deeper and meaningful manner, we must have an understanding of how the secular came to be. Because this is not really about ideas. It's more about an unfolding story, which is also unfolding. Yeah.
Thanks for ending it that way. It is an unfolding story. There is no one answer. There are many answers, and there are many ways of doing it. And this doesn't stop at all. It doesn't stop here. Okay. Now, with that, since we're equal human beings, we should all try to clear this place up together.
Thank you very much. And to our very last commentator, next event, okay? I think that's a big topic. We're going to cover it then. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we leave, I'd like to thank very much our kind venue sponsor, KC, as well as OnePeople.sg. There are many people who are waiting to leave from One People. It's Sunday, they want to go back to their families, so I would like to ask that as you vacate the area, also please pick up your trash on the way back. Thank you very much to all our panelists, to our speakers, as well as to the organizing team who made today happen. Now, the Humanist Society is powered 100% by our volunteers, so if you found anything interesting today about the society, please come and have a little chat with us afterwards outside. Also, you can check out the Facebook as well as the website for future events that we're going to organize. Now, we hope today will kickstart future discussions and help us build empathy to live our lives meaningfully with reason and with compassion. My name is Shamima, and I have been honored to spend this afternoon with you. Thank you.